right, we are officially going to get started here. So welcome everyone who's in the room today. We're in a different room, a little tighter than usual, but working on some audio in the usual room, so appreciate everyone's patience. We're at the 6th meeting of the Clark County Climate Change Planning Community Advisory Group, so thanks to everyone who's in the room and online. I'm Sylvia Chigurski, and I'll be helping to facilitate today's meeting. And I'll start with just a reminder of our team today. So we have Clark County staff and consultant team. We also have a new member of the team, or new to you all, Claudia Denton, who you'll be seeing later today, and she'll be presenting some of the greenhouse gas reduction sub-element presentation pieces. So I'll let Claudia introduce herself when we get to that point. She's part of the parametrics team, so thanks for joining, Claudia. All right. We're at request of some of the members. Hi, welcome. Come on in. We're just gathering here. Just a reminder briefly about the vision of this group and the statement that you all sort of collectively created at the beginning to implement the House Bill 1181 and create the climate chapter to support Clark County meeting in communities, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, vehicle miles travel reduction, resilience, and environmental justice goals, with this vision of good stewardship, better health equity, green jobs, transform transportation, energy, and waste systems, and being prepared for uncertainty. So we just hope you all keep that in mind as we have our conversations today and in future meetings. So next slide is the purpose and objectives for today's meeting. Hopefully you can see that. I know the screen's a little smaller today, so I should also note you do have the meeting slides.
We're closer too.
You are also closer though, but in case you can't see the slides, you do have them printed in the packet in front of you, so feel free to follow along. There are some more detailed slides later on the greenhouse gas piece that might be harder to see up there. But the purpose of today's meeting, a lot of it is going to be presentation out. The last couple of meetings have been a lot of discussion as we were talking about the resilience sub-element. Today we're shifting gears a bit and moving into the greenhouse gas sub-element of the climate element. So to get a lot of great background introductory information to help you prepare in the greenhouse gas conversations as we move forward. So a lot will be on that. And you will also get an overview of the criteria that are going to be used to evaluate the goals and policies for both resilience and greenhouse gas sub-elements. So a brief overview of that piece. And then we're also going to circle back to the conversation we had last time. You might remember we spent a lot of time going through the goals and policies for the resilience sub-element. Got to consensus on a lot of pieces, so kudos to the huge amount of work you all did then. There were a few outstanding items though, so today we're kind of circling back to give updates on some of those items. And there were a couple of goals and policies that still needed kind of a consensus recommendation from you all on whether to move them forward or not, and maybe to revise them a little bit, so we'll have some time for that. That is a shorter piece of the agenda though, so we're going to try to move through that quickly with the end of our meeting today. All right. And then on the next slide is just our agenda, so we'll have our usual project updates, and then spend the bulk of today with that greenhouse gas sub-element introduction, a bit on the prioritization criteria, about 20 minutes circling back to the resilience goals and policies, and then have time for public comments at the end of the meeting and just wrap up with that. Okay. And just a reminder about our discussion guidelines today. Again, today is a little bit more information focused, but we always encourage you all to kind of provide a balance of speaking time, even during our Q&A sessions on the greenhouse gas piece would be good, you know, get questions from a variety of people here, and just listen, speak with respect. You all have been great about using great discussion guidelines. I will remind everyone about the chat etiquette, those online. Just a reminder that if you use the chat, just do a chat to all so that everyone sees it and it becomes part of the public record. Unless it's like a technical Zoom issue, then go ahead and send a chat to Nicole. Great. So before we dive into the meeting, just want to do approval of The meeting summary, tag number 5, meeting summary. See if anyone had any comments, edits on that.
Do we have that?
It's in your meeting packets, yes. Don't think you'll be able to read it all today. It was sent out in advance as well, but you do have it printed in front of you.
I must give kudos to you for sending them out in advance. Thank you.
Yep, that was Nicole.
We should tell the Public Works Director of Cowlitz County to do the same.
All right, well, yeah, I'm not gonna expect anyone to review them at this point, but if they, we'll just go ahead and approve unless there's any objections.
Well, we don't do Robert's rules, so what do you want from
Well,
us?
Yes,
I have made a comment on
Yes.
G21P2.
yes, and
Is
I
that
did wanna point
something to
out,
be
Dave,
discussed later?
your comment is on the actual goal and policy. We are gonna address that one when we circle back to the resilience goals and policies
I think we need to,
at the end of the meeting, so we can talk about that then.
wording
It's
is what I'm talking about.
the wording for that one, yep.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that then. Does that
Okay,
work
thanks.
for you?
That'll work for me.
And I will be sure to circle back to you when we get there to
Okay.
make sure that we address it.
Was the Zoom chat, this is all of it?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
You may, most people were actually in person last
Yeah.
time too. Sometimes we can chat longer because folks are online, more online. Okay. Great. Then we will continue on. Great, then I'm going to hand it over to Jenna for some project updates.
Nice to see you all again. I've got mostly just logistical updates for you all. So as Sylvia mentioned, I did print more than usual today because the screen is smaller, but hopefully between the printed materials, the iPad, and the screen, you find your preferred way to follow along during the meeting. We are going to be in this room again next month. There is construction going on this floor, that's affecting our larger meeting rooms, but all goes smoothly with the construction process, we should be back in the larger room in September. So, you all know that.
Jenna?
Yes.
Do we have a printout on project updates?
I did not print
Okay.
that out. And then, let's see, your meeting materials, I did not print them, but they are online, all the comments. So there are comments from other TAG members as well as from the public that have come in since your last meeting. So feel free to check those out on the webpage if you haven't already. Other updates, we did give an update to the county council on July 10th. And on July 18th, we gave an update to the planning commission, briefing them on the greenhouse gas inventory, which is a big part of today's conversation. But if you're interested in what they had to say about that, their recordings get posted on the county website. So they each have a meeting page, but if you're looking for that and can't find it, let me know. I'm happy to send you a link if that's of interest. And then I wanted to welcome Philo back to the group. Philo was with us at the beginning, had to step away for a while, but is back as our freight representative in the group. So welcome back, Philo.
I was wondering about
Welcome.
that. So, yeah, welcome back.
Welcome back.
All right.
Jen, I have a question.
Yeah.
So on the comments, are those cumulative over, or is that like each week, each month, you're doing a new set? Because there was 72 pages.
Yes, that was just since the last meeting.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's everything that comes in up until the meeting, but since the last meeting.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did. I tried to look through it, but 72 pages is just cumbersome.
No, a lot.
I think there was one that was not Monica.
Yeah, that was Dawn.
So,
Can you give us the cliff notes next time, please?
and we like to do this to share for transparency, right? I think how closely you look at them, what you do with them is totally up to
Okay.
you, like but it's for us to make sure
Okay.
we are sharing everything, so,
Okay.
the information's out there.
Okay.
That is all I had for updates.
Great.
Oh,
Yes.
I also, was recommending the city to also, Rebecca Small and her team, to look at the, county, comments that came in, because there's a lot of valuable information there, and I feel like we should be working as a team, because we are community, so, I've been sending it out, and also to the, what is it called, Commerce, their survey, I put a link into the comments for the county, so just sharing knowledge with everyone.
Great. Any other updates from anyone else? All right, then we are going to get into our background information for the greenhouse gas sub-elements. I'll hand it over to Tracy, who will also work with Claudia. Over to you. And I'll say, this is kind of a two-part presentation, so we'll have first half, taking some clarifying questions along the way if something doesn't make sense on the slide, but then we'll also have time for Q&A after the presentation for kind of more of the, diving in type questions. So over to you, Tracy.
Got the iPad put together in time to talk.
Perfect. And we also have filled every seat, so we'll see if other characters, I don't think anyone else is showing up in person.
So
but-
this isn't on paper, it's just on,
This is in your packet, the really
Yeah,
thick one.
It gets back.
oh, okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
put- Okay, all right.
Starts about
And you'll
right here.
follow along up above too. So, great. Well, hi, everybody. As Sylvia mentioned, we're going to transition to an introduction to the greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub-element. So really long name, but we'll talk about it as emissions reductions, greenhouse gas element, and you'll get more used to that. So today on the next slide, we just have a lot of information for you. So this is really just to set a common foundation for everybody so that as we're talking about emissions reductions, then you'll have a good understanding about the emission sources here in Clark County and what that all means. And so we've started off with a little bit of greenhouse gas inventory 101, just making sure that we're talking about the same things as we move into sharing with you the greenhouse gas inventory results. Those inventory results we're going to share high level with you today and then send out with you the full report in your meeting follow-up materials. So if you want to dig into the report in more detail, you can do that. But you'll get the high level overview and orientation today. And then we'll talk about what the emissions reduction planning process will look like. It's going to be a little bit different than the resiliency element, so we just want to give you an overview of that, and then we'll talk schedule, and we will pause along the way for questions. So if you have specific questions, like you just can't move off of a slide without understanding something, please interrupt us because we want to make sure everyone's following along. But if it's really about interpretation and implications and things like that, we have some question time set aside for that. So please hold those till that time, okay? So at this point, I will just turn it over to my colleague Claudia Denton, who will go over greenhouse gas inventory 101 and then dive right into those inventory reviews.
Thank you, Tracy. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. So as Tracy mentioned, my name is Claudia Denton, and I'm the greenhouse gas lead at Parametrics, and I've been kind of leading this task with Tracy and some other folks. And I'm here to share the GHG inventory results, but before that, do a little GHG inventory 101. And as Tracy mentioned, feel free to interrupt if you need to have some clarifying questions answered, but there is a section at the end of my specific section about the GHG inventory results as a whole. Next slide, please. So first, just some background information on what a GHG inventory is. It is an accounting of greenhouse gases, so GHGs, mostly emissions that are released, but also those that are removed, known as sequestered during a specific period. So this one is calendar year 2022 for an organization or community, in this case, unincorporated Clark County. It's largely from the burning of fossil fuels for energy. We'll discuss all the different sources. But some other sources also include refrigerant gases from air conditioning, refrigeration, things like that, wastewater treatment, landfill waste, and land use change. And the reason this is important is it provides an emissions baseline and a way for you to track your emissions reductions over time and measure your progress towards any climate goals. And there's a variety of greenhouse gases out there. Kind of the three most common are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. There's also a variety of higher GWP gases. So GWP is global warming potential. You can see that table there on the right. They all have different climate impacts in terms of how much potential in a way it has in warming the atmosphere. So you can see carbon dioxide has a global warming potential of 1, and all the other gases are kind of set compared to carbon dioxide. So methane is 28 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Nitrous oxide, 265 times. You can see it goes up from there. There are different versions of these numbers. So specifically, this is the IPCC 5th assessment report known as AR5 with 100-year values. You can also look at 20-year values commonly for methane and things like that. But these are the most standard in this moment in time, is to use this version of global warming potential values. Next slide, please. And we call that 1 metric ton carbon dioxide equivalent. So you'll see this term throughout the results in the report and the presentation. So metric ton CO2e, this is how we normalize all of those gases. So 1 ton of methane is 28 metric ton CO2e. And 1 metric ton CO2e is equivalent to just a regular average car driven 2,500 miles. 13% of U.S. Home energy use for the year, like kind of a U.S. average. 46 propane cylinders for home barbecues, or 1.2 acres of forest sequestration for 1 year. So that additional forest growth in 1 year. And on the right there, you can kind of see, visualize what 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide looks like compared to the human scale. So you can see a human person there. And a large building behind. You can kind of visualize what 1 metric ton carbon dioxide looks like. Next slide,
What
please.
is forest sequestration?
Great question. So,
Yeah, but I should know what it is. If it's gonna be
So-
my favorite, I should know what it is.
It means to take it away, so you don't like
Yes.
it at all.
right, so like humans breathe in, we breathe in O2, oxygen, and we exhale carbon dioxide, CO2. Trees do the opposite. They essentially inhale CO2 and exhale O2. And so the additional growth from that carbon, basically the tree getting bigger, that bark is made of carbon, and it breathes in the carbon and holds it in. So that's known as sequestration. It's no longer released in the atmosphere. It's being sucked into the tree, if you will.
So out of these bulleted items, that's the good guy.
That's the good guy, yes. In terms of accounting, that is a negative rather than a, well, positive in terms of adding to versus the negative being removed from. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Why
My
do you
pleasure.
put that in?
What's that?
So we'll know what a ton does there. We got a positive and a negative value.
All right, what other negative values are out there then?
Oh, no, that's it. It's just,
Home energy. Oh,
All right.
it's either being carbon or greenhouse gases being
Oh, yes, I
emitted
do.
or
I mean-
removed.
I will put my card up.
Yeah, go ahead, if you want to ask Claudia. I'm not sure she heard you.
Oh, I mean, if you've got, if there's something good on there, is there other good things that would, go there also?
Other sources of
Other
sequestration.
forms of like, same thing as forced sequestration, is there something else good that happens
Yeah.
out there that eats carbon?
Great question. I mean, all plants, living organic matter does, but trees are kind of the main one. You know, they grow really big and tall, unlike grasses and things. The ocean also breathes in carbon dioxide, but it's released on a more equal level throughout the year. It's like goes in and out the carbon cycle, but trees kind of grow biggest and hold on to it the longest. So they're the most common way to talk about carbon sequestration.
Claudia and Don?
I wanted to ask a question on the previous page, and I was gonna hold it, but I might forget by the time we get to the end. Does anybody measure methane leaks in Clark County?
That is a good question that I don't know the answer to. I know there's some kind of global watch groups that look around the earth and measure with satellite imagery. But specific to Clark County, I do not know of any.
I asked Southwest Washington Clean Air Agency if they do that. They said no. And I've read that if there was a pipeline leak, if it's in a rural area where it's hard to get at, they just let it go all year long until they can get a crew up there. That was in the town of Franklin, New York. And so nobody really knows how much methane is leaking. We got a FLIR camera and we took it down to the Northwest Natural pumping station down at the Port of Vancouver somewhere. And we were able to capture methane leaks. And the guy that was trying to find the leak borrowed our camera because he couldn't find the leak. And so anyway, then the second point I want to make about methane was you have a 100-year time frame here, but I think you also need to add the 20-year time frame because the 20-year time frame is about 86 times the global warming potential compared with carbon dioxide, and I would suggest consider adding that to it. Thank you. That's all for now.
I can address both of those things. Those are great points. All the data will be there to do that analysis, looking at the 20-year timeline for methane. But we follow the protocol standards, the norms, which are the 100-year values. But you do have a point in that methane is more potent on the shorter timeline. And I do want to add also that we do have some sources of methane leaks because large emitters of any greenhouse gas are required to report to State of Washington Department of Ecology. And we do have natural gas pipeline emissions included in this inventory that is measured by Northwest Natural and included here.
Thank you.
My pleasure. If we could move, oh, yes, more questions.
One more question.
No, it's not even a question. I just wanted to agree with Dawn.
Okay,
Yeah, and ditto.
all right, and I'll move forward 2 slides here, I think.
Perfect, thank you. So the inventory boundaries for this, again, are the unincorporated areas of Clark County. I'm having a hard time making sure that I'm not talking over anybody. I can't see the room anymore when I'm in presenter mode, so definitely let me know if I'm speaking over someone.
Will do.
Perfect. So the inventory boundaries are unincorporated Clark County. There's 3 different scopes when you consider emissions. Scope 1 is everything that is directly a source from the geographic boundary or organization. So sources like natural gas combustion or gasoline, diesel combustion, any sort of fossil fuel that is occurring inside the boundary, industrial process emissions, farming and agriculture, anything that is occurring on site. Scope 2 is grid supplied energy. The emissions are occurring elsewhere, but the energy is brought to inside the boundary. And then scope 3 are indirect emissions that are occurring elsewhere, but due to generation or demand from inside the community. So landfilling of waste, or if wastewater is occurring elsewhere, and the energy lost or emissions associated with bringing the energy to the community, any sort of air travel or consumption of goods and services are in the scope 3 kind of category. So this follows GPC protocol, which is one of the acceptable formats from the Washington State Department of Commerce for this. And it's calendar year 2022, and the unincorporated areas are split into urban versus rural. The urban areas are inside the urban growth boundary. So the urban growth areas are considered urban. Anything outside of those urban growth boundaries are considered rural for the purposes of this inventory. Next slide, please.
We have a question here from Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, this
Yes.
is Dave Rowe. Is wildfires and backyard burning, part of this inventory?
Great question. It is considered, it's included, and I can explain it more later, but it is a 20-year average, so it won't be necessarily any sort of wildfire emissions from 2022 specifically. It can be a little too challenging to track on a year-by-year basis, but it is included as the source of emissions, yeah. All right, so next we will talk about the actual GHG inventory results. Next slide, please. All right, so the first category of emissions are your local emissions. They total 1.5 million metric tons CO2e, so this is for scale. 1.5 million is your local emissions. With your population, it comes out to be about 6.1 metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent per capita per person. Your
And this is
largest,
rural Clark County, right?
this is unincorporated.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we do have some information about the cities in the reports, and they 4 of the cities have their own inventories conducted at the same time. But unless noted, it's strictly the unincorporated areas where the county has authority and jurisdiction. So
Question?
yes,
And sorry,
please.
question, go.
Brent Marsden. So where can we find the city numbers?
The cities of Camas, Washougal, Richfield, and Battleground are distributing their reports when they are ready. I'm not sure what their timeline is, but they have received theirs.
it'd be a
Vancouver does
website?
their own. Excuse me?
It'd be a website?
I'm not sure how they're planning on distributing their results. Jenna, do you have any more information about this? I'm not sure you do, because I'm not sure if you coordinated about anything like that.
Yeah,
Or Tracy.
This is Jenna. After this meeting, we'll send out the full inventory report for the county to you all. We do have one snapshot that shows the totals for each of those cities. So you'll see that there, but then otherwise, as those cities share their information more broadly, you can get more details.
Okay.
And to
Go
my
ahead.
knowledge, the smaller cities don't have any, and the city of Vancouver does their own through another contractor. And so they do have an inventory, and we have in some areas added their kind of results as well, but they're from a different year and using a different protocol. So they're not super equivalent, but Vancouver does theirs, and that one is available online, at least the previous version.
And we have one more question from Don. Go ahead, Don.
This is Don Steinke. The Clark Public Utilities has a gas power plant, but it's in the city limits of Vancouver and not in the county. But a lot of the electricity we use in the county comes from there. And how is that accounted for in this chart that we're looking at right now?
Yes, that will be included in building energy. It's a scope 2 source of emissions. And if it's used in the county in the unincorporated areas, it will be included here.
Thank you.
I do want to remind everyone, there's plenty of time for questions at the end of my section. Again, we do welcome some questions, but if they're more about follow-up questions rather than technical understanding, I think it might be better to hold, if that's all right with everyone. Okay. Okay, the previous slide, please. I still have a few more things to cover. Thank you. So building energy and transportation energy emissions are nearly tied for the first place main sources of local emissions, about 36% each. And then next, agriculture, forestry, and land use. Again, this includes things like wildfire, agriculture, whether it's from farming crops or livestock, 21%. really just in the rural areas of the county. And then industrial process and product use, against things like refrigerants. And then solid waste and wastewater are two more smaller sources of emissions. But those are your local emission sources, where you have the most responsibility, and they're occurring more directly inside your community, mostly. Next slide, please. And then the other kind of half of your emissions are your imported emissions. These are more of a shared responsibility of emissions as they occur elsewhere, but are due to people buying things or generating waste or things like that. So for 2022, that's over 2.5 million metric tons CO2e. So local was 1.5, your imported emissions are 2.5 million. It's a little bit more of an estimation. It's harder to get real data than your local emissions, but largely come from goods as well as food, a little air travel, and fuel production. It comes out to be 10.7 metric tons CO2e per person. Next slide, please. So here you can see your results kind of side by side, and we also have it split by urban versus rural. This is largely due to population differences between urban and rural, but some things, for example, the agriculture, forestry, and land use, you can see that it's all attributed to the rural areas. We're not assuming there's any large-scale farming going on inside the urban growth areas. You can see local emissions there on the left in kind of the rainbow colors. Again, building, energy, and transportation being the largest sources. And then on the right, the imported emissions in that magenta color. You can see goods and food being the main sources of emissions. And these have a combined 4 million metric tons CO2e, which comes out to 16.8 metric tons CO2e per person. And you can see the population breakdown there on the bottom right, about 70,000 in the rural areas and 170,000 in the urban areas. Again, does not include any incorporated city populations. Next slide, please. From here, I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on each sector, each category of emissions. So first, your building and energy emissions, 36%. You can see this is from electricity and natural gas primarily. There's some other emissions from propane, fuel oil, and some gases that are a product of electricity and natural gas delivery. You can see electricity is a little bit more even for urban and rural areas, while natural gas is a little more different. This is primarily due to the availability of natural gas, a little bit also due to housing makeup, that more detached single-family homes in the rural areas compared to the urban areas. But there's less availability of natural gas in the rural areas, and therefore there's more electricity use there. Next slide, please. So transportation emissions, those green pie slices are your local emissions. The magenta, again, is imported specifically from air travel here. You can see it's a little bit different between urban and rural, but mostly just how much driving is happening with passenger cars. This is assumed to be gasoline emissions, 45 to 52% across the county. Followed kind of by diesel use. So freight is assumed to be diesel in its on-road sources of emissions. Transit is a small piece as well from C-Tran. And then known off-road diesel, this can be from construction, or it can be from logging or farming use, any sort of off-road use of diesel. And also rail emissions, a tiny sliver from electric vehicles, and those are the local sources. And you can kind of compare that in scale to the air travel emissions from the typical household's purchase of air travel anywhere in the world. It's not specific to local. But you can see there on the rural side, there's a tiny sliver of local aviation, 0.2%. That's from your local little airstrips where people have private use planes or farming planes and things like that. Next slide, please. All right, agriculture, forestry, and land use, known as AFLU emissions. I'll explain what net forest carbon loss is momentarily, but 75% of your emissions, so that adding of emissions to the atmosphere, are from losing tree cover or forest canopy. There's also 22% from livestock. It's primarily beef and dairy cattle, but it takes into account a variety of livestock animals, but sheep and cows have the most kind of emissions because there's a lot of methane from their digestive system. And then soil amendments from fertilizers and things like that are also included here. So to understand that net forest carbon loss, look at the image on the right there. You can see there's a much larger source of total emissions from losing forest cover. Again, this could be from logging, it could be from land use change where you're developing, or it can be from forest fire. There's a variety of sources of emissions. And you subtract the sequestration from that. You take into account the forest growth as well, where logging trees are growing or new forest is growing, whatever the source of sequestration is. And you take that net, and that is your 227,000 that's included in your net forest carbon loss. Next slide, please. So industrial process and product use, there's different sources included in this category, but it's only refrigerants are relevant to Clark County. So it's really residential and commercial use of refrigerators, air conditioners, walk-in freezers, and this could be from transportation, your cars have air conditioning, and also from buildings. It's kind of mostly from buildings. And this is done on a per capita basis. And these are, again, those high GWP gases, the highest global warming potential. Common refrigerants are like 1,000 to 2,000 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So these are small in quantity of gas, but they can be large in impact. Next slide, please. And then last of the local emission sources are waste and wastewater. We have solid waste being the main source of emissions here. Urban and rural are just on a per capita basis, difference here. It is hauled outside of the county, so they do occur elsewhere, but it's part of your local emission sources. Central wastewater is only for those hooked up to a central wastewater treatment plant. They're in the urban areas. There's no central treatment in the rural areas, so that's why there's no results there for rural. And then similar to that electricity and natural gas dynamic, since central wastewater isn't available in the rural areas, there's more septic emissions. Septic is not as good well, it produces more methane and nitrous oxide than a central wastewater treatment plant does. So that's why the septic emissions are so high compared to the central wastewater. And you can see that there's a lot of septic in the urban and rural areas. Next slide, please. And then last but not least, your imported emissions. This is more than half of your total emissions. It's largely from the consumption of goods and services. I'm sure this is really challenging to see on the small screen or small printout, but I'll highlight the kind of main sources of emissions. It's from, in terms of goods, which are your main category, it's clothing and furniture and construction. And it's urban on the left, rural on the right. That's probably challenging to see. So that's the difference between the two bars next to each other. And then for food, it's largely meat and dairy, as well as there's cereals, produce, all other food. And then fuel production, there's a lot of transportation fuels. Those make up more than half. There's also electricity production, electricity T&D loss from transmission and distribution of the electricity. And then there's natural gas production, and natural gas distribution is that's actually part of your building energy per protocol. It's a little funky, but that's included there. And then air travel is there on the right. That is all of my slides. So now, the next slide is just the Q&A slide. I'd be happy to answer more questions now.
All right, thank you, Claudia, for all that great information. And I think we can probably go back to any slides if people have questions on particular ones, but I see a few pen cards up, so I'll just go, Jessica, Noel, and then Nick. And of course, if you're online, feel free to raise your hands. And maybe also, Claudia, are there specific kinds of questions or comments you're asking for at this time, or just kind of open to anything?
Any questions for me are welcome. I'll be leaving during the break and handing things off to Tracy and Josh. So if you have any questions about the inventory or any questions about anything that I presented, now is the time. Although Tracy, if you think of something later, Tracy might be able to answer them as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to Jessica.
Sorry, I made notes as we went along. I want to not waste your time. My first question was the list of the greenhouse gases when you compared the global warming potential as compared to carbon dioxide. I was just wondering, what's the lifespan of those gases?
Oh, that is not something I have off the top of my head, but that is a great question. And actually let me think for a moment. So carbon dioxide, from memory, this lasts a very, very long time, sticks around for ever, effectively, considering our lifetimes. Methane, on the other hand, has that short burst of GHG, global warming impact. So that, again, that 20-year value is much higher. And I think it kind of disperses after about 100 years, but I'm doing this from memory, so I'm not the best with this. I don't know if Tracy or possibly Josh, listening, have any more information about how long the gases stick around for.
I don't off the top of my head either. I think that's something we can provide a resource on, but I think
Mhm.
the important thing to notice here and why it's normalized by GWP and normalized to carbon dioxide is that that value that you see is based on a 100-year spectrum compared to carbon dioxide. So it is still an apples to apples comparison to carbon dioxide, regardless of how long each gas lives in the atmosphere.
Yes,
So,
good point. Thank you.
The high GWP gases, even though the percentage is very small, can have a large impact. So they do not stay around as long as carbon dioxide, or they do?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but if that's where the reason why, the way that you would see the difference in the lifespan of the gases is by looking at the difference between a 20-year global warming potential and a 100-year global warming potential. But in this case, they're still normalized compared to carbon dioxide over the 100 years. So we can point you to another resource if you want more information on that. But
Okay.
Yes.
Did you have another question, Jessica?
Yeah, hold on. On the slide that had greenhouse gas emissions by sector, building, and energy, was wood-burning stoves and fireplaces included in that?
That's a great question. They are not included because they're almost completely biogenic emissions. And so they're not considered part of the human activity GHG inventory, right? These are just your anthropogenic or human caused emissions where we're changing the carbon in the atmosphere due to human activity. Wood burning does release all of your carbon dioxide, all the carbon content from the wood immediately, but it's considered on the plant's natural life cycle. It's a little confusing. So no, it is not included here, and would be another source of carbon dioxide to consider, but it's not part of protocol.
So what about pellet stoves? Because then you're concentrating the energy in a pellet.
It's still a plant-based product. The building energy sources that are included here are electricity from any fossil generation source. So natural gas, coal, those are the main two that are relevant here, but there are other sources of fossil fuel generating electricity. Natural gas, of course, fuel oil, propane, there's some sulfur hexafluoride from the electricity transmission and distribution system. And that should be it for building and energy sources. So no, no kind of biomass is what it's called, no plant-based sources of combustion for heating.
Thank you.
All right.
Noel? Or unless,
Oh,
sorry.
I
you
just
had
had
another.
one more question, and it was on the slide, where's it at? It's, the, greenhouse gas emissions by sector, waste and wastewater.
Mhm.
A lot of times in rural areas, solid waste is burned. And so when you were putting this into categories, not just decomposition of solid waste, but burning of solid waste, was that included in those numbers?
That's a great question. Just because there isn't a way to track this data, it isn't included. It could be if there's a way to estimate it, but I don't know of a good way to estimate that for the county. Single like spot individual sources of emissions are so small and rare, they're not tracked in any way. So no, that would not be included here.
Thanks, that's good. And Noel?
I have 3 quick things. I think they're quick. So I want to understand more about imported emissions.
Mhm.
And I guess, are we saying that these goods are, because they're not produced here, that the actual greenhouse gases are being imported because we bring in these goods and consume them here? I'm
Yeah.
a little confused.
It's a
Is that correct?
philosophical imported. It's
Okay.
not, yes,
Okay.
philosophically imported. Yes, so because they're not local, it's they're happening elsewhere but on your behalf. So these are just a shared responsibility, and anything that is your scope 2 and 3 is someone else's scope 1. All emissions in the world are somebody's scope 1. It kind of matters less when it comes to a community inventory, but these are happening elsewhere, but they are being sold to residents and businesses and agencies inside the community due to the buying of stuff from around the world.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, my pleasure.
And then next question is on the transportation side. So we have urban and we have rural, but I'm thinking in terms of, there are a lot of people that are now living in adjacent counties because they can't afford to live in Clark County,
Mhm.
and they're having to commute. So is that accounted for in this?
Great question. Yeah, so there's a few different ways to calculate transportation emissions, and we chose the method that most closely aligns with other requirements from the Department of Commerce. So this is based on all vehicle miles traveled inside of the unincorporated Clark County area. So it doesn't matter if it's a resident or someone from a neighboring county, or freight vehicles that are just driving through. Anything that is being driven through Clark County is included here. And then what would then be excluded is that if people are living in Clark County but driving also elsewhere, whether it's commuting to work on the other side in Oregon, or traveling for other reasons outside of the county, that would be excluded. So there's a little bit of a give and take on transportation emissions, and this is the methodology that most closely aligned with the needs from the state.
Awesome. My last question is,
Yes.
how does this compare with other counties throughout the U.S. of like size? How does our inventory compare? Are we going to get into that, or is that information you can get for us?
That is something we could potentially get at another time. Let me see if I can think of this intuitively. I would say it's a little bit less than the US average, and I would hesitate to say. I would make an educated guess in that there's so much commuting between the Portland, Vancouver metro area. There's a lot of going back and forth for work, for education, even for recreation, that people are driving a lot outside of Clark County as well. And that would probably be why it's a little bit lower. Again, it's a little bit difficult to compare because there's 4 different ways you can estimate your results. And for example, I don't know if the city of Vancouver, they've also done their inventory. I don't know if they use the same methodology or not. That's something we could find out. But if it's the same methodology, you can compare that way. But I feel like I've seen mostly a average per person of 4 metric tons CO2e per person from transportation emissions. And let me look in real quick. For Clark County, it's about 2.2. It depends. It's 2.0 for urban or 2.7 for rural, which is lower than I have seen before.
Thank you. And
Thank
also,
you.
Josh, did you have an answer to this as well at Parametrics?
Just to say, that because we have so much of our energy, from, local sources and cleaner sources, that most other counties, especially if you go Midwest or southern states, are going to have a higher energy footprint. But it's also like number of folks that live there and how urbanized it is. And, generally apartments consume less energy than single family homes. And then if you have a huge agricultural industry, that also can swing it quite a bit. So those are kind of the variables that change, really that density and that dwelling size, and then also the regional energy mix. But most of us are living in the same fuel world across the country.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Josh, for adding that.
All right, Nick Massey?
2 questions. What kind of emissions do electric vehicles give?
Yes, you can see the electric vehicles there. Obviously, there's nothing to scale that. It is instead of looking at the tailpipe emissions, it looks at the emissions associated with producing the electricity. So much like buildings. If vehicles were buildings, they'd be measured the same way. So Clark PUD being your electricity provider, we looked at the emissions associated with providing a unit of electricity to the community, looked at how many electric vehicles are in the county, and did an estimation of how far they're typically driven to get those emissions from EVs.
And then the second question is, you mentioned that these are factored by miles driven.
Yes.
How do you calculate that?
That is a great question. We were given numbers from the State Department of Transportation, I want to say, to use. We did not create the VMT numbers. We did create the splits between passenger vehicles and freight. That was done based on actually, I think I'd have to follow up to answer that. But the actual VMT numbers were from WashDOT. And those were recommended to use because they're part of other future components of the project.
I just chuckle because I don't know where they're getting their information from too, because nowhere have I ever given DOT the miles I drive.
Oh, no, I think it's kind of like surveying in a way. They have cameras on freeways and streets and things like that. And I think they do some counting that way. I'm really not super familiar, but I know this is something that they've been doing for decades. It's not new, and I'm sure that they've refined how they do it over time, but I can't speak to how they do it.
Josh? Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
2 things. So more and more we're seeing data off of vehicles. So 11% of the national fleet is reporting data and mileage data. So that is not as big a sample as we want, and those vehicles tend to be more efficient because they're newer. but that is an ever-growing, more accurate source of data that is being used. I think eventually we'll be nearly 100%. And then also, I just wanted to give some rules of thumb with the EVs. If a typical car has 3 units of pollution to be produced and 7 units of pollution over its useful life for 10 perfect units of greenhouse gases, an EV will use 4 units to be made and less than 1 to operate. And something to keep in mind too, that a lot of people have a misconception about, is that it's the exact same energy that's required to move both vehicles. And electric vehicles as of 2025 consume 20% of the raw energy per mile driven as a traditional combustion vehicle. So they're actually 5 times more efficient. Starting next year, they're currently 4.6, and when they first arrived, they were 3.5 times more efficient. So it's a dramatic decrease in total energy, albeit from different sources. That's a very important part of that equation. And then there's the other piece of, if you're using renewable energy, it's close to 0. And even if you had the dirtiest coal-based product in a new EV for power, you'd be somewhere in the neighborhood of 38 miles per gallon or 40 miles per gallon. So on average, it's dramatically better than the typical combustion engine. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. All right, Don, and then we'll go to Monica.
This is Don Steinke, and I have 4 topics to address. Refrigerants. Is there any way, I think I know the answer, but is there any way that anybody can measure the refrigerants that get leaked in Clark County every year? I think the answer is nobody is able to keep track of that. And I'll just share with you that the Department of Commerce sent an email to me saying that they want to provide incentives for convenience stores that have old refrigerators that are inefficient, and they're probably leaking this refrigerant and getting it recharged frequently. And they want to provide incentives for small and medium-sized convenience type stores in low-income neighborhoods. And somewhere along the line, this county probably needs to know that those incentives are there for those kinds of stores. Second topic, I think it's time for me to Google.
Don, if you have 4 questions, it might be difficult for me to answer them all at once. Would you mind if I answer them one by one?
You bet. I mean, I'm not, please do.
Thank you. I don't do well with trying to remember my answers to 4 separate questions, so I think this will work out better for everyone. But yes, refrigerants are really difficult to track on a local level, like in Clark County. The best way to track it is knowing how much you are buying each year, because you're buying it to replace what was previously lost to the atmosphere. That said, that's not the only way. The numbers we got were from the state of Washington. And so the state does track a little bit easier exactly how much was bought or sold in the entire state. And so the numbers here we have are per capita averages for Washington and applied for residential and commercial use in Clark County. So that is how these are estimated. But yes, as you point out, there's some old refrigeration in particular that is a lot more leaky than newer stuff. It just breaks down over time. And so that is what you need to target, because again, that small amount has a significantly bigger impact than if it were another greenhouse gas.
And a comment to add is that the state of Washington is recommending different types of refrigerants that we need to know about that have much lower global warming potential, but I'm not capable of going into that. Regarding the topic of what happens to methane, somebody said it dissipated. I think it converts to CO2 after, like most of it will have converted to CO2 after, well, it takes, after 100 years, most of it will, but I have to do the research on that, but that's my understanding. And then regarding biomass, it isn't, I think it ought to be part of your inventory. Yes, it's renewable, but it takes 20 or 30 years before it is. So burning a cord of wood probably has more greenhouse gas emissions for the energy than if you burn gasoline for the next 20 years, because it takes at least 20 years for that to be captured. And so I think biomass should be included in the inventory. And then the last thing is, regarding the methodology of the inventory, 2 or 3 years ago, Washington State Department of Commerce introduced legislation saying that they wanted to be able to do more accurate greenhouse gas inventories. And apparently what they were doing was getting it from EPA and then guesstimating or extrapolating, interpolating, whatever they needed to do to get it for smaller regions. And the reason why it took EPA 3 years, it took them 3 years to get all the reporting from all the states. And then they would come up with a report, and Washington State Department of Commerce or Ecology, I think it was Commerce, requested legislation to allow them to do it more frequently. And I don't know if that passed, and I don't know whether the data we have now, I think I heard the word 2022. And so I'm thinking that unless there's been a change, the inventory is going to be 3 years old, which is the best we have. And it's a guesstimate. And so just want to share that. Thank you.
I want to make sure I understood all of your components of that last comment. Yes, so we did a 2022 inventory. Some data is not available that quickly. It's a couple years later, but there are a couple of data points that use a previous year as proxy, although I don't think it's very much. And yes, the EPA does provide a state average, but and you could use that on a downscale basis for per capita for Clark County to get a rough idea, which is really valuable for a lot of areas that don't have enough information to do their own. But yes, this one is done with more careful data collection, more careful analysis, and will be different than some other estimates, but should definitely be more accurate and be more insightful as you move forward in this process.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. And
My
just
pleasure.
quick time check. We wanted to take a break around 6:35, which was a couple minutes ago. So there's still some questions here from Monica and Andrea online, and Jessica.
I have a quick question.
So let's try to maybe do them quickly. I know people need to have the information, but try to move them quickly. Go ahead, Monica.
Thank you. Monica Zazweta. Mine is around the imported emissions graph, and I noticed natural gas production. To me, it looks very tiny, because there's a couple of videos that I've printed out summaries for and links to for everyone to look at. But with fracking, with the natural gas, there's key points of like water contamination, toxic chemicals, radioactive waste, community impacts, and regulatory gaps on the first video. And then the second video, the first video is called Fracking How, the Untold Story. And the second video is Fracking is Dangerous, the High Cost of Cheap Gas. And the key points on there were groundwater pollution and depletion, air pollution and health impacts, lack of regulation and oversight, disproportionate impacts on marginalized communities, and dubious economic benefits. And so to me, that seems a lot more than just this little sliver that is up on the screen. And so I just want to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture holistically. And so that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yes, great question. So this is just one way to look at the activities in the county. We're just looking at greenhouse gases here. So as you pointed out, there's other impacts and considerations to look at, but this is just an inventory of greenhouse gases in and out. It is comparable, you can see, to electricity production. I know it's really hard to see, but it'll be easier to see in the report, and we discussed that. But yes, the upstream emissions associated with natural gas production, the fracking, that is included there. It is a small sliver compared to all of these other pieces, but that doesn't mean that it's tiny compared to what a household does on, an annual basis. So it's not nothing. even though it's just standing next to bigger things.
Thank you, no, thank you so much, thank you.
All right, and Andrea Smith online? Oh, and it looks like you're on mute, Andrea. Go ahead. I don't think we're able to hear you. If you're able to type your question in the chat, I can read it out in just a second. I'll go to Jessica first. Go ahead, Jessica.
Hi, just a quick clarification on the transportation pie charts. Again, I was just noticing that under urban, the off-road diesel was higher than in the rural off-road diesel. And I was just wondering what vehicles were included in the off-road diesel that would make them higher in the urban areas rather than rural areas?
Yeah, I think this is one of those we're a little bit limited on data and had to make some assumptions. So this is on a per capita basis, so it'll be proportionate based to the population. But there are off-road sources of diesel in urban areas as well, and it's mostly construction. You know, large road construction vehicles, building construction, excavators, anything that just isn't on the road. There's warehouse sources of diesel emissions as well. Generators, forklifts, stuff. Was there another comment or question related to that?
No, I was just curious, I know that the off-road diesel has a higher concentration of sulfur. Does that impact the greenhouse gas emissions or the carbon emission because the sulfur content is higher and it may burn differently, a little differently because of the sulfur content? Not refined the same?
I think the only difference between the two of them is the color that's added to the, there's no difference.
There's no.
It's taxes.
I
The
think
taxes is all- yeah. It's just the
In-
dye that's put in.
So there's not a different sulfur content?
No, otherwise, we would kill our engines. I mean, everything's done on a specific sulfur content for our excavation equipment. If somebody gave us a different deal, it would not do well for our motors that are out there.
I can add one GHG consideration, and that's that typically off-road diesel uses 100% fossil diesel. It's not mixed with anything, not blended, while a lot of on-road diesel is at the pump is B5 diesel, meaning it's blended with 5% biodiesel, which is again a bio component and is not counted here. So it's kind of like 5% less in emissions, if you think of it that way. But in terms of the diesel itself, it doesn't have a different content from the fossil part.
And then just one more quick question. On the rail side, I was just wondering, we have rural rail and urban rail, but don't our trains pass through both? Like, so would they be the same because it's going from one port to another port as it transits? And then most of their activity moving back and forth are near the ports or the rail yard, which is in the city of Vancouver.
Yeah, this is another one where it's a little bit trickier to get data. So yes, the ports and anything that's in Vancouver are not included here. So what was most appropriate based on the data that we had was again to do per capita. I know that that's not the most satisfying answer. But rail lines are sort of more concentrated in the corridors where people live. And there's passenger rail as well. So it's done on a per capita basis, based on the state level data as well, just because rail, there's not a lot of good rail data. They don't share a lot of data publicly.
Thank you. And Andrea, I'll try you one more time. Are you able to come off mute?
Chat said she wasn't able to.
Yeah, okay. Well, we can't hear you. I'm sure Claudia would take an emailed question if you have one, or we can get it to the team and email it to one. All right, well, I know we are due for a break. Thank you, Claudia, so much for all of that great info. Anything else you want to share with the group before we take a break?
No, just thank you for your time. Pleasure presenting to you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, let's take a break and get back at 6:55, and we'll continue with the introduction to greenhouse gas sub-elements. 6:55.
I know, but I'm
With-
gonna.
with
Okay,
human beings,
we
human
are
nature.
gonna
I'm all
dive
for it.
back in here, welcome back.
Okay.
Miles.
Okay, so we're gonna go into part 2 of the greenhouse gas sub-element introductory presentation, so back over to Tracy.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for coming back. You haven't decided to leave us now that we've told you about the greenhouse gas inventory. So, at this point, we're going to start talking about, what we're gonna do about all of those emissions. So, this is the real goal of the, greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub-element is actually talking about, the planning process for reducing those emissions, and that's the charge that we have from the Department of Commerce and the state legislation.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
next slide there, just want, or say next slide, sorry. Want to, just make sure that we're all on the page on what we're talking about with greenhouse gas emission reduction. The Department of Commerce guidance defines it as taking action to reduce or eliminate the emissions of greenhouse gases in order to reduce the rate and extent of climate change damage. So, just to give a little bit of context about the upcoming process, we've gone through this whole process that we're, coming more to a close on, not full close on, but with the resilience piece and thinking about resilience that's in response to climate hazards, right? The greenhouse gas emissions are what are causing the climate hazards and what we need to build resilience against. So, addressing the greenhouse gases is really important because the climate hazards are really related to the way that we experience the impacts of climate change and how climate change can impact your daily life. And in the process of looking at those, at resilience policies, we started off with some broad brainstorming, and then we combined and packaged that brainstorming into a set of policies and goals. And so now, as we're going into the greenhouse gas emissions reduction section, this part requires identifying and adopting effective actions that are going to be reducing the emissions that are released in Clark County. And so we're going to take a little bit of a different approach on this one because in comparison to resiliency, which is much more about how you experience climate change in your daily life, greenhouse gas emissions are really based on the science of the greenhouse gas inventory and where the emissions are coming from. And so we want to make sure that that our team is directing this process to be addressing the primary emission sources in Clark County so that the emissions reductions will be effective, and also the broad spectrum of emission sources so that there is a variety of approaches being undertaken. So
I'm gonna move the microphone to you, just for the
Oh,
presentation.
sure,
Just realized
yeah.
that's all you can
Removing a microphone, sorry if you hear some. All right. Hopefully online that sounds a little bit more clear. So when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions reduction, it's important to keep in mind that best science indicates that we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels to avoid severe climate change hazards and reduce the risk associated with long-lasting or irreversible changes, such as the loss of some ecosystem. And what you're experiencing now is already the consequences of a 1 degree Celsius change in global warming. And we're seeing that through more extreme weather, rising sea levels, diminishing Arctic ice. We talked about flooding and landslides, and all of the hazards that we've been talking about. So that's the overall goal for us. And of course, the state of Washington has set a net zero goal by 2050.
So that's, what Clark County is directed to work toward as well. Next slide. So here's a little bit about what the upcoming process is going to look like. I told you that it's going to be a little bit different than resilience, and so here's what we're looking at. The first part is doing the greenhouse gas inventory, so which you just saw the results of. That helps us identify and quantify local emission sources, and then highlight key emission sources for potential reduction. That part has been completed, and you have the results there. So now the next part that we're going to be embarking on is identifying measures, and this is particularly measures that are in the high impact sectors. And we know that there are a lot of examples of proven and effective actions that can reduce greenhouse gases. So our team will be working to, now that we have those key emission sources, we'll be working to identify a host of measures that respond to those emission sources. And keep in mind here also that the primary focus for this is on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, but like Monica brought up with natural gas, there are a lot of other impacts associated with a lot of the the activities that we do that create greenhouse gas emissions. And so we'll also be looking at co-benefits and seeking to minimize those through the actions suggested as well.
Maximize
Maximize the co-benefits. Is that,
Yeah.
if that's not what I said, that's what I meant. Yes. Maximize the co-benefits, maximize the greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential.
Tracy,
Yes.
you're going to elaborate on all these things later, right? This is just,
This is an overview of
This
our
is just
upcoming
preview,
process.
yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Uh-huh.
all right.
And so, some of those co-benefits are things like doubling as a resilience action, human health, jobs, ecosystem benefits, other things like that are what we're going to be looking at. So our team will work to identify relevant and impactful actions, and then we'll get review and suggestions to those actions, and then we have to go through an evaluation process. So the evaluation process will once we, backing up, I skipped one. Once we identify the measures, we're going to prioritize them using a multi-criteria analysis, which we're going to be introducing at the end or towards the end of this meeting. So that will help prioritize key measures. And so then our team will evaluate those measures fuller, so we'll get a more complete view of those measures and the potential here in Clark County. And then all of the prioritized measures will get a review using the equity lens. So we'll look at the equity implications for each of the prioritized measures. Then once we've done all of that, we're going to set emission reduction targets. As I mentioned, Washington State has a net zero goal by 2050. And so Clark County is directed to use that as an overall goal. And then we will be developing reduction targets for each sector and along different timelines. And then the final step to this process is to integrate the measures into the comprehensive plan, which will be at the end of this process that we do. And then over the coming years, Clark County will update the greenhouse gas emissions inventory periodically, and then track progress toward the reductions that they've committed to. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an example of what greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies look like. And this is an example that comes from another county. This is after a similar process in another county. They looked at their emissions and then decided to adopt these various strategies. And under each one of these strategies, there's a bunch of different actions, and I'll get to some of those examples here. But One thing that's really interested to note in these is the emissions reduction potential in each of these categories. So looking here, we're starting with electric vehicles, and since transportation is one of the key categories in most places, including Clark County, in this particular, and the exact numbers here aren't as important as looking at the difference in the numbers in this image here. So in looking in this county, they were able to reduce over the next 20 years or so about 15 million metric tons by adopting various electric vehicle strategies. And then you look down a little bit lower, and other transportation-related options like mass transit were also really important and provide a lot of other co-benefits as well, but had a far limited potential of greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential in this county of 1.3 million metric tons over the next 20 years. So it's important to make sure that we're focusing on a variety of actions and all of the co-benefits, and then also thinking about the potential scale of the actions as well when we're looking at them. And then this county also looked at no new natural gas in any new buildings as one of their actions, and that was only 0.4 million metric tons of greenhouse gases over the next 20 years. And so I put this in here as a list just to give you an idea of some of the different things that we can think about, and some of the different scale that some of them have. And again, we're looking at a variety of emissions reduction actions, but also addressing the key emission sectors that are defined by the greenhouse gas inventory, and then also where there's scale and there's a lot to be done, and where we can, where the Clark County can prioritize actions that will have significant reductions. So let's dig into a couple of these categories just to see some of the different options there. This example is the electric vehicle actions that were under that top category for this particular county. And so you can see here that there are a variety of actions, and one of the things that's really important to note with the sorts of actions that we may come up with here in Clark County, like this county, is that the county may have a different role related to some of the different actions. So in some of them, the county's role would be to act or implement something, or do something, or be the solution, right? So that would be, in this case, for example, replacing county-owned sedans. That's something that the county can do, and the county can do completely. In some cases, it might be the county may play a supporting role, where they would maybe be supporting other legislation that would have an impact, that would support the county and its emissions reduction goals.
Is that within our scope to tell the county to replace all their sedans with electric vehicles?
It is within our scope to recommend that it would be an effective greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategy to replace vehicles.
I can add something to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Stilo.
If Washington adopts the CARB regulations from California, which they're scheduled to do in 2026, or maybe next year, they'll start, that's part of those regulations, that all the counties and supportive agencies to government have to be compliant with zero emission vehicles as part of the phase-in of all those regulations. So that'll become all.
So we don't have to say anything.
Okay.
Thanks, Stilo.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
What
Go ahead,
about
Noah.
hybrid vehicles? And what, like, so we're talking about EVs, hybrid is not considered an EV, obviously, but how do EV or hybrid vehicles impact?
I don't have the exact numbers, but just thinking about it conceptually, different hybrids would use a different, some of them work by making gasoline engines more efficient, and some of them work by using electric power sometimes and gas power sometimes. And so they'll have different impacts depending on that and how they're driven. But hybrid vehicles are generally seen as a transition technology toward electric vehicles for just the technology is advancing and they have so many benefits. So yeah, they reduce emissions in the near term, and then they're generally viewed as a transition technology.
We get specific data on it, or like, could that be one of the, you know, on the list of, where was it? The slide previous where it talks about, you know, kind of like how that measures.
Yeah, so it is a potential action, but as I mentioned, we're looking at the most scale for items, and so in general, we would be directing thinking more toward electric vehicles than hybrid vehicles, just because it is a transition technology.
I guess I'm still a little confused, because if we don't know how much it's actually impacting, then...
Oh, I just don't have those numbers in front of me, but...
Okay, but we know it's less than everything that was on that chart.
Hybrids?
Yeah.
Right, because they're still burning gasoline, and so if you recall from the greenhouse gas emissions inventory section, when Josh was mentioning the efficiency of the conversion of energy into a mile driven, their new electric vehicles are 5 times more effective than gasoline vehicles, and electricity is lower in carbon intensity than gasoline, and so all around it's much more effective to go straight electric than hybrid. But we can talk specific strategies coming up. I want to make sure to get through the overall idea of what the process will look like.
And I think Josh has his hand up, so did
Oh,
you
yeah.
have a more
Go ahead.
specific response to that, Josh?
Yeah, I'd just say that the hybrid is about a 50% improvement in range. So compare that to 5x, 0.5 versus 5x. So it's about 1/10 as effective as an EV in reducing emissions. Oversimplified for sure, but close enough.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
And we are just doing clarifying questions. I'll remind folks so that we can get to everything. Go ahead, Dave.
My son and daughter both have a plug-in. My son has a RAV4 plug-in, and my daughter has a Prius plug-in. Both of them go 70 miles without ever using their gasoline. They both go to work. He lives in Portland. Both of them live in Portland. They both go to Hillsborough, and they never fill up for all week long. So plug-in is a little different than just hybrid.
Okay. And Andrea?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yay!
Okay, so this is kind of the point that I wanted to make earlier, is that sometimes I think we get so wrapped up in efficiency standards and like what they rate when those are at optimal conditions. For example, when my heat pump is running in the middle of winter, it's not 3 to 4 times more efficient, or 300 to 400 times more efficient than, you know, my gas furnace would. So I just want to put that into context as well. We need to be concerned about the power density of energy sources as well as their greenhouse gas emissions. And so I just wanted to put that at the front of people's minds, and also make the comment that from earlier, just wanted to kind of state that as it goes to refrigerants, I think that's why we're seeing a movement, at least in HVAC appliances, in moving towards the A2L refrigerants instead of what they're currently using, because it is better for the environment and also less flammable. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andrea.
Thanks.
Keep going.
Yeah, so I'll keep going. And then, so just one more role that the county can have in the sorts of emissions reduction actions that we will be talking about for Clark County is a convening role. And so there may be instances where maybe facilitating a group like this in the future could be a role that Clark County could have. And so there are some ideas there that are examples of that sort of a convening role. So just thinking about the idea that, that we will be looking toward a variety of actions, and then there's also a variety of roles that the county could have in implementing those actions. And on the next slide, we have some other ideas, some other examples. This is again from that sample county of active commute and telecommuting actions. So we have some of those county roles and some supporting roles. And so this could include things like, you know, bicycle adoption and supporting school districts with safe routes to school and a variety of things that get people getting around using their bodies rather than vehicles. And then just to give a little bit more variety of potential actions, again, these are all examples, and we haven't defined any for Clark County yet. So here's how that county defined out their energy efficiency actions, things like upgrading HVAC systems and discussing or supporting utilities and educating the public and different actions there. So you can read over these later and get a better idea of some of the sorts of actions that you might be seeing. And then we also want to highlight that the Department of Commerce, in creating the guidance for how to implement this legislation, has curated a list of sample emissions reduction actions. So we will also be looking to that list, which is called the menu of measures. We have some resilience measures that come from the menu of measures as well. And so we will also be looking to the menu of measures for greenhouse gas emission reduction items.
I have a question about that.
Yeah, go ahead, about the menu of measures. Go ahead, Nick.
Again, I'm against using those above and beyond what this group talks about. So, I think we need, hopefully we get to do our own before we're led with what Department of Commerce wants.
If you look at the menu of measures, I can't remember exactly how many there are, but there are hundreds of measures, and they're not, they are, as I mentioned with the greenhouse gas emissions reduction actions, there are a number of highly effective, proven actions, and so we are likely to see, even if we were to come up with our own measures from complete brainstorming, we're likely to align heavily with what you would see in the menu of measures, because there, when you have a set of emissions categories and you have a set of emission sources, they don't tend to vary drastically from community to community. Sometimes you'll see a little bit higher in one area or another.
And again, I have no problem with that we have our own deals and we compare them over there to theirs, and if they meet, that's great. But again, I don't want to create the same thing we did before about bringing in these things and say we have 224 of these, we need to get them down to 30 when we already had 30 with our stuff already. So I'm very concerned about that menu of measures. Again, if the state wanted us just to adopt a plan, they would have sent us on a plan. But we're here as an independent council to say what our plan is. So I want to just state the thing. I want us to remain independent from Department of Commerce and their deals. If we align with them, great. But again, I don't really want to see 600 measures be brought in here that's going to confuse what we're trying to do as Clark County. Because we're Clark County, we're not the state. We have our own set of our goals that we want to get across there.
And so it sounds like you want to create measures that work for the unincorporated county, and that this group really has kind of the buy-in in creating, rather than blindly picking from a list that's out there in the menu of measures.
That's what I would prefer.
Okay, and I think that is what this group is charged with doing.
And that's the intent of the menu of measures. It's just a shopping list to choose from.
right.
And we don't choose anything we don't want. Like they have on that menu, they have high occupancy vehicle lanes, and that may not work in Clark County.
So when I'm done here, we'll later today be talking about the prioritization method, and that's where we'll help define what it is that is important to this group in Clark County for defining which measures seem appropriate for this group. So some examples, here are some more, thank you for that one example, Dawn, from the menu of measures, and we have a couple other measures here. One of the charges for the Growth Management Act is to reduce vehicle miles traveled in addition to greenhouse gases because they tend to align fairly well. So we have a couple of measures here like travel demand management programs and strategies, or creating safe, well-connected, attractive bike and pedestrian transportation network. So those are some examples from the menu of measures of ways to reduce vehicle miles traveled. In the renewable energy and energy efficiency section, we have examples of retrofitting buildings for energy efficiency, for example, or requiring publicly owned buildings to be powered by renewable energy. And then for housing density and supply, one example is to allow or encourage micro-housing units. And so those, you can see the reference there to the different measures in menu of measures there.
507.
Meaning that there are at least 507, and I did not count them.
Just for you.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
want 507 goals.
Oh, no.
I mean,
Well-
absolutely nothing
We'll
to it.
expect a full report from you next month.
All right, great. All right, well, we have some time for Q&A, and again, this was just sort of a sampling of what the actions could look like moving forward, an explanation of the process to get there. But there's a lot of work ahead for this greenhouse gas sub-element. And I saw Andrea's hand go up first online, so I'll go to Andrea and then Ann and John.
Thank you, Andrea Smith again. Just wanted to see if there was a requirement with this sub-element to create basically not just a goal, but also like metrics in which we want to reach, to make sure that like the things that we're doing are going to be like actually measured and, you know, improved upon in future growth management acts. And then I also was curious if there is like any, well, never mind. It kind of goes back to my other question. So never mind. I'll just stick it to the one question. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Jenna. Thanks for the question, Andrea. So the legislation that is driving this project, it does have a monitoring and reporting requirement. So if I'm remembering correctly, I believe it's every 5 years, we're going to have to be able to report on our progress. So the guidance from the Department of Commerce is, you know, so they gave us this like 2050 net zero goal, but the idea would be for us to set some probably every 5 years so it aligns with our reporting timeline. Make sure we have targets for every 5 years that we will report against, show our progress with the various actions that we said we are going to do. So, so yes, we do need to do what you were saying.
Great, thank you.
And Ann Foster?
Tracy, you may have mentioned this infamous menu of measures. That's on the Department of DOC's website, or where do you?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
I also have paper copies if you want
All 507 of them, huh?
You know how many trees died?
I'll go online, thanks.
No,
It's much better on paper.
They exist, they're already
Is it
printed,
really
so
hard?
if anyone wants them, they're here.
Okay, thank you.
This might be a good time for a plug for some
All right, let's go to Dawn, and we might ask folks to speak up if you're not right by a microphone.
I thought you were calling on somebody over there.
I thought, yeah, Ann, or did you get your question answered?
Yeah, I just wanted to
Okay.
know where I found it. Yeah,
Dawn?
right.
Regarding renewable diesel, there's some renewable diesel that has a very low carbon intensity and some that has a high carbon intensity or global warming potential. And I just want to say that they're not all the same. And then before we get excited about them, we just can't assume that that it says renewable diesel, that is good. You can't assume that. And then the mass, well, I can't remember what it was, so I'll skip that. And then,
Light reading.
so,
I got it online, thank you.
I like what you used as action would be to convene. I just got an email yesterday from the United States Department of Energy saying that they are convening stakeholders nationwide to develop standards for synergy between electric vehicles and electric utilities. If you do it right, it'll save money for everybody. And then lastly is, I haven't said this yet, but I bet so it's time. Number one step is don't dig deeper. Don't increase emissions. And we're doing things every day in Clark County, approving things that just increase emissions. It makes it harder for us to reduce them, while at the same time they're increasing.
Can you give some examples?
Yes. They've approved gravel mines on Livingston Mountain and 2 of them up in the north end of the county. And at the one on Livingston Mountain in East County, in my neighborhood, first of all, they had the gravel mine, and then all kinds of issues there. Then they decided that they wanted to convert that to a housing development. And now they have probably 50,000 trucks hauling fill material up the mountain to the gravel mine.
Back from where it came, right.
And so that's increasing emissions. And then anytime you buy any tool, any engine that burns fossil fuels and invest in it, it's going to last 20, 30, 40 years, that's increasing emissions. And it's almost impossible to tell somebody, oh, you just bought that for $50,000. Well, that's increasing emission. Now you have to replace it with something that's cleaner. So it's really important to try to avoid doing that.
Thank you for that.
I don't know where it fits in any of this, but I just throwing it out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Monica?
Awesome. Monica Zazweta, for the emission reduction component, that's in the realm of building local and growing local so that we don't keep on bringing in more outsourced stuff, correct? Is that?
You're talking about goods and services?
Yeah, cause it's like, we're getting all this clothing, this food, or this furniture, we're getting materials, everything. So by building local, growing local, manufacturing local, that would actually reduce our greenhouse. That would be a part of this overarching policy, correct?
In many cases. In some cases, the greenhouse gases are not the primary reason for supporting local industry. But in most cases, in many cases, you would find that there would be reductions in greenhouse gases by producing things locally.
Awesome. And then I wanted to add this, if it can't be reduced, reused, repaired, rebuilt, refurbished, refinished, resold, recycled, or composted, then it should be restricted or removed from production. Pete Seeger. So, just wanted to add that. Thank you.
And Dave Rowe?
Yeah, on the last slide that I saw, they talked about bicycles. Let's see. Yeah, well, back to that last one. Create a safe, well-connected, and attractive bicycle and pedestrian transportation network to encourage active transportation. I want to add that I'm made a battery-powered 36-passenger rail vehicle that operates off of batteries. It could be used on this Appalachian Prairie Railroad from Vancouver up to Battleground. Little things like that could be added that would replace a lot of automobile trips. So that's the point I'm making about rail travel.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah,
Sorry,
Monica?
Monica says that again, for the Implement County Bicycle Master Plan and, for schools and stuff, I said it before, but the bike bus, like actually seeing, parents want to, instead of, shuttling their kids to and from school on a bus, they do, which are going all electric, to, start the kids young with bike bus and like picking them up from each stop on their bikes. That way, at a young age, they're used to riding their bikes. And they're like, this is what I need to. I don't need anything else. So, yeah, just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Awesome. I see we're already getting into GHG reduction strategies, which will be the next meeting, so glad everyone's excited about it. I think you had another couple of slides, right?
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about our upcoming meeting schedule. So just to give you an idea of what is coming up, and, so we are now in July. We have done the, Climate 101, the greenhouse gas inventory, and then we're talking about the emissions reduction process. We will soon talk about, prioritization criteria, and, give you just a first look at that one. And then in August, we will be we're going to start focusing on different sectors with greenhouse gas emissions. So we will be focusing on buildings and energy, and then returning to the prioritization process. And then in September, we will look at consumption and waste and transportation sectors, and then that will also include a variety of other sectors that we'll discuss in September. So then in October, we will review prioritized greenhouse gas emissions reduction actions, and then we will also look at the resilience actions in their prioritized form, and get some reactions there. November and December, our regular meeting schedule coincides with some holiday weeks, so it would fall during the Thanksgiving week and right around Christmas, and so this group will be taking a break as our consultant teams will be busy behind the scenes, preparing a lot of work for you, to come back in January to talk about goals and targets and emissions reduction measures, and then resilience goals and policies. In February, we will look at some draft final recommendations, and then seek to have final recommendations from this group in March.
So,
Yeah, go ahead,
thank
Ann.
you. So that assumes that it goes before the council, April?
So council won't be voting on this until probably December of 2025. So there's gonna be about a 9-month gap. Because you all need to make your recommendation. The community planning department, we need to finish packaging it into the comp plan, right? Because it's gonna be one chapter among many. And then it's gonna go forward to the planning commission and county council as part of the whole comp plan, which is gonna take about 6 months to get that whole process. So there's gonna be quite a delay between, you all will be done, and then you're gonna wait for 9 months.
Did you say, Jenna, did you say September or December?
December, like we are gonna be working up.
the comp plan is due the end of December,
Yes.
right?
Yes, but we
So
don't
that means
anticipate
that they,
council
if
voting.
it doesn't go before the council, is it a make or break deal, or what, I don't,
Yeah, so like typically, if we were doing this climate project just as a standalone project, right, you all would finish
yeah,
your work, we'd bring it to the planning commission recommendation goes to council.
yeah.
So we're doing that, it's gonna take 6 months because it's part of this, we're like a project within a project.
I get that, what I'm sort of stunned by is the concept that the council actually won't see it
Oh, well,
until December when it's the dead end.
Right, so they are getting kept updated, so we've been briefing them, and, they will, in probably summer, I think, of 2025, so within a couple months of you all finishing your work, we will say, okay, and here is the recommendation of the group, but that's one of like 15 chapters we have to do that,
Right.
on, so that's why
I was a little worried
it
about
takes.
this council sitting, with new councilors on, sitting there trying to make their way through it.
Yeah, and as we near the end, we'll be able to sort of make sure you all know, like, the rest of the process, so you can, while this group will be done its work, you all can still participate in, hopefully you all will be supportive of whatever comes out of the group, right? That you can help, be a voice of support through the process. So we'll talk
So
about that.
there's little room for negotiation then? Is that correct?
In terms of,
And we're probably getting off track, I'm sorry.
I think you're right on track. Keep going.
So,
Very important.
well, so at the end of the line, it's been packed, we've decided, okay? And it's, you guys have packaged it.
Yep.
And you're very diplomatically, chunking it in front of the council so that it won't, so that they will be familiar at least to some extent with it. But it just, in my mind, it just leaves little room for any kind of back and forth.
yeah, I mean,
Let's say they say, wait a minute, we don't understand, or we don't get, or we don't want anything having to do with reducing our fleet of sedans, or, making them all EVs or something like that. So, and there's no opportunity in that schedule for us to come back with any kind of
Debate.
compromise or.
Is it an all or nothing thing?
Yeah, it's
You got it. You got the plan.
Well, it's sort of an important, in terms of how we're investing in this.
yeah,
It's sort of we all knew that it's gonna be up to 5 guys who are sitting in the room next to us, sometime next year. But, it's a little bit stunning to sort of see it come to such a sudden close. That means we would have little room to
yeah, and it's,
meet and come back with, okay, we understand where you're coming from, how about if we say it this way? Or,
yeah, I'll say a little bit more, but I do want to be, I just know we have other stuff we need to get to, but,
yes,
the council sort of approved the process,
yeah,
right, that we're following. So it's not like they have no clue
right.
what's going on, right? Like, they understand we have this advisory group, or other advisory groups, right, that this group is gonna make a recommendation, that's what's gonna go to the planning commission. So it's not like this is gonna come out of the blue, and it is up to us staff to brief them along the way, so they are tracking. But the way the type 4 process and like the comp plan approved, like we get, the legislative process becomes, very driven by its rules, and that it goes to the planning commission recommendation goes to council. It doesn't mean something could happen where council says, hey, can you work on this some more?
Yeah.
But it's basically out of our hands, right, like out of staff hands. Like at that point, we present to planning commission, and then it's their recommendation to council, and then council to decide. So anyway, so that's a whole nother conversation, but it's.
I apologize for, putting it in front of your plate, Janet.
Yeah.
And you can show up at council meetings.
And we do have a council liaison on this committee, so it may be good to
Oh, they showed up every
consider
time.
that as well. At key milestones, when we're at those points, we may consider whether it may be appropriate to kind of have more of a conversation there.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure we're getting to all the questions here. So Dave, go ahead.
You have, CAG and EJC. Now, is that is that where we're reporting or what is the CG?
It's environmental justice.
Okay, environmental justice.
Yeah.
So we reporting to them?
No, they will report to us.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure in this meeting schedule how this works.
It's
So-
just, there's two committees that are part of the climate element development process. So there's
Okay.
this group and then the Environmental Justice Coalition,
So
kind of
we
working
parallel?
separately, but parallel,
Okay,
exactly.
Okay.
There's a partners group too.
And the partners group.
And there's a couple EJC members from,
Yeah.
me, one.
Good.
Oh, and Gabby. Sunrise? Oh, I'm sorry, you were first, thank you. Go ahead, Nick.
Sorry, Sunrise.
No, you were first.
I'm going to stand in shoulder to shoulder with Ann on this one. I have been in advisory committees before, and I'm speaking from experience, where we gave them our decision, and staff decided to change it and presented them with someone else. So the trust is a little bit shaky on that for me. And for 5 or 6 months of sitting on the shelf, all this hard work that we're doing right now could be for naught. And so that's my deal. I mean, maybe it's time to change the process a little bit, but that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, I was gonna echo that, but instead, I would just say, I was going to request that, I think this is definitely something that maybe we can talk about in the next meeting, and maybe have a little bit more information around this, because I too have been in advisory committee meetings, same kind of thing, where, you know, often I feel like it's not really beneficial and they're not listened to, so, I know I was hesitant to be on this one because of that, but I think that this is something that there's enough questions about, and instead of taking the time today, I'd hate to see this just pushed away, but maybe a little more conversation about it would be warranted at the next meeting.
Sunrise. And Monica?
Same, echoing, I've talked with some people over the EJC, and community members, saying like, okay, we're gonna give our input, it's gonna get, go to the, CAG, and what if they're like, well, that can't happen, that's just not the way it works, and then it's gonna go to other people's hands, well, that can't happen, that's not the way it works, and then another person says, well, that can't happen, that's not the way it works, and so all of our community input that we've been getting from the community, like, how is that going to be? Like, for sure, because it's like, from the BIPOC community, from the low-income community, we have not been listened to for some time now, and so it's like, are we gonna be listened to now? Or is it gonna be the status quo, making the decisions at the very end? So, thank you.
No, I think it's, right, these are like totally valid concerns, right? And just to throw in the mix, the council who's there now is not the council who's voting on this. Like, right, we don't even know who's voting on this. So I think there's.
And is there a line item veto on that comp plan when they get together and say, yes, we want this, no, we don't want this, yes, we don't want, and we get a plan that is total contradictory to everything we did here. That is a major concern.
Mm-hmm. So I think glad to talk about this more, right? And I think also understanding, like, people get voted or appointed into certain positions have power in those positions, right? And certain authority. So understanding, we can talk about the process, and, I know on staff, we're very committed to taking what you all recommend forward, but that's like all we can do, right? Like, our role sort of stops there. So anyway, there's so much we could talk about here, and then how you all can, when we're done as a group, if you want to advocate, right, as it goes through the rest of the process, we can talk about the key points to chime in and stuff like that. So, but I am wary of that time, so.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just super quick, and it, sort of adding on to that, I would just say, this is like phase one of what we need to do as a group. We need to be advocating no matter what. Like, if what goes to council is what we intended to, then we need to go and say, yes, this is actually what we supported. And if it's not, then we need to be also indicating that. So phase one is this, phase two is our advocacy, so.
All right, thank you, yes. And I think that is an important conversation to revisit. Okay, we are a little bit squeezed on time for our next 2 key things here. So I think maybe what we'll do, we wanted to do a little bit of an introduction to the criteria. We might truncate that just a bit, because we do want to circle back to the resilience goals and policies.
Yeah, so I'll give a briefer intro to the prioritization process, and we'll push a little bit more toward follow-up afterwards. So just know that there will be more follow-up afterward, and so we're not going to get resolution and complete understanding on this. That's not quite the intent just today, but as an introduction to the information that we'll be seeking from you in written comments. So part of this process is prioritizing the emissions reductions actions and the resilience policies and goals that we're moving forward. And so we just want to talk a little bit about the prioritization criteria. We can go to the next slide.
so, important here to know what the purpose of the prioritization is. And, here, first of all, we are looking, the prioritization criteria, there are categories for additional analysis, and they're also, they're aligned with, the state priorities, and our goal with you here is to ensure that they're also aligned with community priorities. So there's some direction from the state on what they need, what they should be, and we want to make sure that that's aligned with Clark County. And then, the process that we're going to go through is, have you all confirm the prioritization criteria, and then have the consultants evaluate the policies and the potential actions, based on the criteria that you have set, that you have agreed upon. The result of that will be, prioritized policies and actions. It will also set the categories that we are going to be doing some further analysis on those prioritized actions, because with resilience, for example, we have 35 actions, and so this will set a group. This will help us determine some of those that will get a little bit more extra analysis. And then, just as a reminder, the EJC will be providing feedback on equity analysis on all of the prioritized policies and actions. So next slide. I think today I'm primarily going to orient you to what you're seeing on the screen, and we'll talk more about the content in some of the follow-up actions, because I'm trying to get us back onto schedule here. So,
And I'll also say, I don't think we have any of the members of the public here, so we do have a few minutes.
oh, okay, that's good to know. Thank you. So on the very left-hand column there, we have we have some recommended prioritization criteria. Again, these are aligned with the direction from the state on what criteria should be, and have gone through a process with the consulting group, and so we will be working with you to make sure that you also agree with these criteria. And then there's two columns together that are for resilience, and then two columns that are together for greenhouse gas emissions. Just by the nature of the different topic areas, some of the things are going to be a little bit different for resilience and greenhouse gases, but they're overall consistent. So we want to make you see that they're consistent even if they're applied a little bit differently. So in each category for resilience and greenhouse gas emissions, you can see that there is one column for prioritization matrix score. So based on the definitions of each of these categories, our teams, our consultant teams will provide a score for each action or policy that we're evaluating for each criteria.
Based on what criteria? Based on what?
Based on, what do you mean based on what?
Well, we might think something's important and you might not, so who gets the,
Well,
which lays the golden egg?
So the criteria are not about importance or relevance to an individual. We're going to be talking about criteria that we will be defining further for you. So effectiveness, for example, in greenhouse gas emissions is greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So that's not anyone's importance, that's scientifically based.
Oh, no, that's not what I'm meaning by importance. I mean, I don't understand the scoring process. What's the method of you scoring this?
So we'll score low, medium, or high.
Okay.
So it'll get a score based on whether it's low emissions
Makes
reduction,
more
medium,
sense.
or high. So, yeah, so, and we'll get into more details on how exactly each one will be scored, but just to give you an idea of what that would look like. And then, so there's the method that we'll be using for the matrix score, and then what further analysis will look like in each of those categories. So for prioritized policies and actions. So going back to, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, we would say low, medium, or high, for just kind of sifting out what might be the highest priority as a part of this whole prioritization process. But then when we have the prioritized action, the top actions that score the highest, we'll actually, quantify those emissions. So we'll do some research, we will actually, look at the emission sources and what the potential reductions are. So then you'll actually have a real number. So that's kind of how this is set up. Are there any kind of questions about the different phases of the prioritization and analysis framework? Just in general, not the content, not the contents first of all, but just the how it's laid out.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Are these all equal? So like is effectiveness equal to time frame equal to co-benefits, or is effectiveness going to be weighted more so than, say, cost?
That's one of the things we will seek your feedback on.
And Nick?
Again, I like this cost, the investment of it, and the cost in only. If cost was no issue, we could fix this problem tomorrow. But unfortunately, cost is an issue, and we have to be stewards of everybody around here to make sure that this is affordable for everybody and equitable. So I'm glad we're looking at it.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, do you want to cover any of the other slides now, or for later?
I mean, that's all I have for the prioritization.
Oh, great.
So, I guess, we had planned to be able to talk a little bit more today, so I can't tell you exactly what your assignments will look like for, after the meeting or the request, but we will be huddling tomorrow to, look into that further.
Great. Okay, well, we are back on track. Thank you for that quick presentation.
Just like that.
It always works out that way. Okay, so now we're gonna move away from the greenhouse gas element and move back into the resilience piece and circle back on some of the goals and policies that we left hanging last time. We had an update on some where you wanted more information and have a couple to review in more detail with you all. So I'm gonna hand it over first to Dana to set us up. Remember Dana, she's back.
Do we have a mic, or should I?
Yeah, I'll bring it closer to her.
Yeah. All right, we'll make this brief, but just want to revisit the resilience topic once more for the time being, before we go all in on greenhouse gas. There were a couple loose ends after our last meeting, so you all may recall at the last meeting we had 45 policies up for consideration. We were trying to get that down to 35 by doing some cross-referencing, moving some things to the greenhouse gas sub-element, and, we landed at a tentative list of 35, so there's a few things that have come up since then or through our internal project team conversations that we want to bring back to you. We have 4 policies that were confirmed for cross-reference based on our conversation last time, so that's a quick and easy just confirmation. Yes, those moved along. We have 6 items that need additional CAG confirmation, and then we have 2 items that might need a little bit more of an in-depth discussion here today so we can reach consensus on wording. Next slide, please.
And actually, while you're going through the slides, I just want to direct folks to this in your packet. This was sent in advance, and it includes the resilience policies and goals and update. It's similar to what you're going to see on the slides, but just in case you wanted to reference the handout, that was sent out about a week ago.
Yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention too, just as a heads up, next step, after our conversation today, we'll hopefully be at a point of having a final draft list of resilience goals and policies that will go forward for analysis. That's what we'll send that out in the days following this meeting once we get everything up. Next slide, please. So I'll just cover this slide before passing it off to Jenna for some of the deeper discussion, but these are the 4 policies that we had on our list last time that were word for word right out of an existing county plan. So the first 3 were from the comprehensive plan, the 4th one was from the natural hazards mitigation plan, and you all agreed last time that we could identify those in a cross-reference in the climate element of the comprehensive plan rather than recommending them for, double inclusion. So I'm just confirming for you all that these have been approved by the county to move off the list. So you won't be seeing these ones on our resilience list moving forward. And I'll hand it over to Jenna now, I think, unless there's any questions or concerns about that. Mostly just an update to say we did what we said we would do. Great.
We like that.
All right, and yeah, so now Jenna can.
Dana, I have one, I'm sorry, I think you guys have said this over and over again, but you made the comment, at the end of this meeting, there will be a, sort of not quite a final, but a final draft, right?
Yes.
To go for further analysis.
That's it.
Define further analysis?
So that's what Tracy was talking about, that multi-criteria prioritization.
That you guys
process.
do?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we wanted to narrow down to 35 policies that will then go evaluate all of those criteria on those.
Okay, and then at some point, we get to see it again?
Yes, yep,
Okay.
it will be back.
Okay. Just checking. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'm on to the next batch?
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to table 2 in the handout. So these are items where, based on our discussion in the last meeting, staff had a follow-up, something to check. So we are circling back, and we want to share what we found, propose what to do about what we found. So I'll walk through, we've got 3 up on the slide. So I'm just gonna give you the update and proposal for these 3. Then let's pause and see if there's any feedback, concerns, and then we'll go to the next 3. Okay, so the first policy on the list, which is Goal 14, Policy 2, was around restoration strategies to be developed and implemented, such that species composition, species conservation, and ecosystem processes are sustainable in the long term. So this was one that was on the cross-reference list, but please make sure our additional text is included. So when we were double-checking this, this existing policy minus the bold text, it lives in our shoreline chapter of our comprehensive plan. And we kind of we would like to reverse our recommendation on cross-referencing this policy, just keep it on the climate list, and here's why. One is that if we just keep it if we just reference the shoreline chapter, it only applies to shorelines, which are a very specifically defined thing in the county, so only along certain streams and lakes in the county. And our impression from the conversation was that this group would rather this apply sort of across the county. So that was one reason we were like, okay, let's not do that. And the other reason is the shoreline chapter has its whole extra special set of rules. And requires a whole additional review process for the Department of Ecology if we touch it. So our recommendation would be to not do that and just keep this version on the climate list for further analysis. So we are reversing our previous recommendation. So proposal is do not cross-reference, keep on the study further list. So that was that one. The next one, which is Goal 15, Policy 1, is to strengthen and build redundancy into infrastructure, including transportation infrastructure, prioritizing areas that may be potentially isolated areas. So this also was one that was previously recommended for cross-referencing. This policy minus the bold text currently lives in the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan. This is the document CRESA produces. It's produced, county and all the cities. It's a coordinated document. We aren't able to update that document as part of our comp plan update, so we wouldn't be able to cross-reference it with that additional bold text. From staff perspective, we would still recommend cross-referencing it and just don't include that text. To us, because the word infrastructure is already in there, the transportation infrastructure is covered in it, and it doesn't seem like it would change, what the policy does. So that's our recommendation, but again, we wanted to check with you all before we went in that direction. And then the third policy on the slide is for Goal 21, Policy 2. The county shall support new and improved passenger and commuter rail transportation services in Clark County and the Portland metropolitan area and along the I-5 corridor from Vancouver, BC, Eugene, Oregon, prioritizing electric rail when possible. So this one, this policy minus the bold text currently lives in the transportation chapter of the comprehensive plan. We are still in the process of checking if anyone has concerns internally with bringing that bold text over. Transportation plans are nested with another transportation plan. So it's taking us a little bit longer to just do that check. So our recommendation is if we get the internal okay to add the additional language in the transportation chapter, then that makes sense, do that. If for some reason we get some pushback internally, we just keep it on the list to study further for the climate chapter. So I'm going to pause there. If anyone has any, well, I guess, Sylvia, maybe you can help pose the question. And I think also Dave might have a comment on one of these.
Yes, and we know what your comment is. So I'm actually gonna maybe first check.
Does everybody know what my comment is?
I'm gonna first check on Paula's, the first and the second one, if folks are okay with those recommendations. I saw head nods as it was being described, but.
Aren't we over our number then?
Well, we'll just say if you're not okay with it.
Yeah, I'm okay with it, but, saying with your material, is this gonna put us over the number?
Yeah, that was my question.
Can we add one to it?
It's okay, go ahead and add it, we'll
Because
figure
now we're up
something
to
out.
38.
We have a solution.
Okay.
We're gonna figure it out.
Jenna has a solution.
Yeah, then I'm thumbs up too.
Okay, any others not thumbs up?
I just wanted to, because I was reading through the species composition, species conservation, and ecosystem processes. I wanted, if reintroducing keystone species, is that with those wordings too, or not? Because I really feel that reintroducing keystone species is something that needs to be talked about.
What are keystone species?
Ones that were, here originally, that have been,
When?
originally.
When's originally?
Before you were here.
Yeah,
That is,
Before Europeans came?
I mean, like,
that
if we
to
really
me
wanna
is
talk
opening
about it,
such a can of worms that.
but it's a can of worms that needs to be opened.
Okay, well, you can, I will not agree with anything that says we have to go back however many years. I mean, I am totally good with native species. We can identify today that we see, but to bring up something that's hundreds of thousands of years ago and try to reintroduce this area just for that, I am not in agreement with that.
That's not what I was
You're
saying.
against woolly
Yeah, that's not what I was saying.
Maybe keystone is somewhat of a, like, jargon word, maybe they're native
Yes,
species.
I think Jenna might have an answer.
Okay.
It's not a jargon word.
No,
Okay.
yeah.
So, okay.
Keystone species is well-known.
Yeah,
By
so-
me.
So Monica, I would say, so my understanding of a keystone species, so something like salmon
Or
is a
beavers.
keystone species
Yeah,
in
or
that it's a
beavers,
very
or
integral
wolves.
part to an entire ecosystem.
Ecosystem, yeah,
Right.
it makes it
So-
more,
So anyway, so I think, and then like,
Without them, the whole ecosystem falls apart.
yeah,
yes. So,
yes.
just on my general understanding of that concept. So I would say that concept is encompassed in this existing wording because it's talking about sustainable long-term ecosystem processes. So a key animal in an ecosystem would be a part of that. So, yes.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
And Monica, we can add that into the comment tracker where we're tracking those like more detailed ideas.
That'd be cool, that'd be
So I'll
cool.
put that in there.
Thank you, yes, thank you so much.
Otherwise, good with the wording as is?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
yes, Nick.
And my comment for saying that is this, that some of us do develop property. And to make these obscure deals that we have to comply with is really, really difficult to do. So if we have this, what we can do in there, then it's a great thing. So that's why I said that.
What I believe was a ridiculous deal that people came over here and said this is a new deal. So, it's a can of worms. The elephant in the room, that people are still.
Mastodon.
Yeah, right? it's something where, you know, people came over and said, this is the way we live now, and people aren't okay with that. People don't like it and feel like the American dream is now the dream, and that's not the dream for everybody. So that's why I say it.
Terry, did you have something on this as well?
Because it was a new term to me as well, I looked up the keystone species, and it's a species on which other species in an ecosystem largely depend, such that if it were removed from the ecosystem, it would change dramatically.
Thank you so
Sharon.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What can I say?
Thank you. What can I say?
Did you have a comment on that?
I
Yeah.
do, and just going back to number 2, that last, the 3 words, potentially isolated areas, does that mean remote areas? Is that what that aren't serviced now, or I'm confused what that means. And I'm just wondering if it's a better way to phrase that.
Yeah, so I will say, this is one directly from the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, so we are not able to edit it, but I would have to go back and read the section for complete context, but, I believe it's, in talking about isolated areas, like areas that could easily get cut off, right? And if like a certain road or a bridge went down or was impassable, that you could have a whole, part of the county that, would be hard to reach. So that's my general interpretation without looking more closely, but I believe that's how it's generally used in that document.
Also, they're only saying prioritize, so that's not necessarily excluding anything else.
Right.
So do you have any other concerns with including that?
No.
Okay. All right. So we're moving forward with number 1 and 2 here for now, so. Great. Okay. Dave, it's your show. Next one, number 3 on the list.
The county shall support new and improved passenger commuter rail transportation. Commuter is one directional, someone in the morning. It's traditionally, you work 9 to 5. So you come in the town from your house and you have a rail or a bus that goes one way. Then at night, when you're going home, you're going back. That's a commuter system. And I don't like that term of commuter. It should be regional rail and freight. I'm saying the county shall support new and improved freight and passenger rail services in Clark County. 3 rail corridors are available to expand rail freight and rail passenger services to and from Portland, up and down the I-5 corridor, Battleground, and east from Clark County. And electric-powered rail vehicles should be prioritized over fossil fuel-powered rail vehicles. That's the statement I thought we could add.
So primarily changing the passenger and commuter rail to
Regional rail.
freight and passenger?
Yep, freight passenger.
So I'd like to respond to Dave. What's the difference between commuter and passenger? Passenger's one way. You're only gonna go one way, and then you might come back. That's the same as commuter.
It should be regional rail in both directions, I guess.
Okay, so regional is your key
Yeah.
word. Okay.
Is it
New and
regional or
improved.
freight? Sorry.
It's, new and improved regional freight and regional passenger rail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that gonna make a big difference on these words on what we're gonna get?
Well, the main thing I'm making is everybody has, traditionally, commuter rail is one direction in the morning and one direction at night. And I want to go from Battleground to Vancouver, or Vancouver to Battleground, or Battleground to Portland, and Portland to Battleground.
So you're saying we're adding light rail as part of our...
I'm not saying light rail. Light rail is different than regional rail. Light rail,
So how are we gonna get to Battleground on regional rail?
Yeah.
on Chilaxy Prairie Railroad.
What's
Like
regional about Clark County?
It's got a rail corridor owned by the county.
Regional?
It's in the region of Clark County, right up the middle of Clark County. It goes all the way to Battleground and even into Yakult if it's expanded.
But how does it get to Vancouver?
Through, there's a crossing there on
I
track.
like that in, down.
It can fly, what they call fly over the Amtrak line and go into Vancouver at that point.
And maybe the question here would be whether the group conceptually thinks that, supporting regional rail, especially electric rail and possible, would be a good strategy too.
I guess we're trying to define terms, because I don't see a county as being regional. It's part of a region.
I would like to see
But
a map.
it's a different, you used to call them interurbans. But that interurban.
Well, I don't
kind of-
consider traveling from Yakima to Vancouver to be regional.
You mean also.
Why isn't it? It's in a
Is
region.
there a different word that maybe better describes what that is?
Well, the whole, what I'm getting put to me right now, I'm against. I just don't think there's a place for a single engine to run from with tracks that were built back in the 1920s to feasibly get a commuter rail that's going to carry anybody back and forth. And we got C-Trans running buses right now that are electric, and can do the same thing for us.
Good point.
Okay. So let's go to
Well-
Noel and Jessica.
Actually, Monica.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought that was from before, go ahead.
Sorry, no, thank you. So I would love to see a map of what you're saying, like what you would like to see it as, and also, is it kind of the same as like the Max over in Portland?
Max can only run on Max trucks.
Okay, but I mean, like,
Regional,
trying to put that
It runs on
already
already
existing.
existing
Okay.
rails.
Okay, thank you for that.
I thought I had a map there, I got a map.
So it sounds like there are existing rails that you're talking
There's
about.
existing
That we don't have to,
Exactly.
like, rebuild or, yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
Just talking about
There you go, Monica.
the word regional.
Awesome.
There's
We're,
Clark County.
we're
Thank
developing
you.
policies
Thank
for
you.
Clark County, so if regional is the problematic word, maybe we could just put in Clark County.
County.
Yeah.
County rail.
Don't those rails need extensive renovations?
Say again?
Don't those rails need extensive renovations?
It says new and improved,
Yeah.
so that's improved,
Well,
extensive improved.
when you have a rubber-tired vehicle, it adds particles to the streams, it kills fish. That's the negative part of rubber-tired vehicles. When you have steel wheels, you're very efficient. You can move freight a lot cheaper and a lot faster. And here's another map of somebody that wants to look at it too. And I've also got two books I just gave, one to Ann and one to Nick. It's written by a person in Seattle that talks about solutionary rail. And you got a corridor, and how they made corridors back in 1800s, they had an overhead wire that came from a dam or some other power source, and it was a high voltage line over the top of the railroad track. So you didn't have to clear any timber or go through any fire hazardous area, because it's over the top of the rail track. And so it's protected from wildfires. And so you have this, in China, they're putting million volts of DC, 1,000 miles on these lines, going over their transmission lines. We could have that here, that we can transfer transmission with the rail corridors that we have here. So this is, it's not a pipe dream, it was done 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure we have time to get through the other policies as well. We do have
Anybody
several
wanna-
others. Go ahead, Jessica, and then Andrea online.
I guess I'm, on the rail, I'm all for passenger and commuter rail, but I don't really want to expand out the number of tracks or put more money into
You won't
more
have to.
tracks on the freight side, just because it's gonna be a while before our freight trains are electric. And they put emissions into the air, they put particles, PM 2.5 in the air.
Electric?
No, the current diesel-powered freight trains. They're loud, they idle for very long periods of time. And so I wouldn't want to add a third track in the rail corridor through our
You don't need a third track.
event.
You
So I
have
guess
the
I was
same track.
misunderstanding what
Yeah.
you you were saying about
Freight.
increasing.
Freight you can run at night, passengers at daytime, on the same track. 17 foot wide is all you need for a regular track. And it hauls, you can haul as much as the 4 main freeway.
And Andrea?
Yeah, I guess I would like to see, I mean, I would prioritize G15P1 over G1P2 just because I would like to see more statistics or an uptick in ridership status as it pertains to like train related and public transit. Having been somebody who had extensive experience in riding public transit, I can tell you that when you are in an isolated area, it's extremely infeasible to rely on public transit. So I would want to make sure that we're expanding that infrastructure before we're adding additional methods of infrastructure, and then also ensuring that the ridership levels are increasing, meaning that more people are relying on that as a transportation as opposed to a passenger vehicle in order for it to make financial sense for taxpayer dollars. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Andrea, and Nick.
Okay, so we're looking at 2050 for a goal. I don't have any problem with including the Sims goal to do that. I'm gonna change my stance.
Long range.
Long range, we can, of course, we need to plan for every exigency. So if we put that in one of the resiliencies, by all means, do it. And if it comes to that we can do something and it makes sense, then I'm all for it. But saying that also, it's gotta make fiscal sense to do it. And so, no, I'm totally fine with leaving
It won't be rural there anyways by then.
What's that?
It won't be rural there anyways
So maybe I'll check with the group. I'm, hearing different things on this one. Where should we go with this? Does someone have a suggestion for the wording that maybe would work for everyone moving forward?
Can Dave just live with it, leaving it like it is?
But change commuter.
Change commuter
I
to?
don't-
Commuter.
Change.
Freight and passenger.
What if we removed commuter, since that's the problem, where
Yeah.
does passenger kind of cover it,
Yeah.
what you're looking at?
Yeah. Improve freight and passenger rail is what I originally said. Drop the commuter part of it.
It's fine, because passengers are gonna commute too, so. I'm
Are folks okay with adding the freight? I know, Jessica, you voiced some concern with that.
Well, I guess this,
Well, long
And this is
term.
moving forward for analysis, not
Possible.
necessarily including.
And what if they have electric engines by the time they get there?
electric
Well, they
engines
will.
make a huge difference.
In 20 years, they're gonna have
We could
electric
say
engines.
non-hazardous.
right,
Freight.
all right.
Yeah, non-hazardous
Hazardous freight, that's another.
I agree with that.
Okay,
I don't agree
New
with
and
the non-hazardous
improved.
part yet.
No.
We have to move
You
intrinsically.
have to agree.
Hi.
Because it's 8:20.
But they
It's 8:20 now.
Okay,
Your
so-
logic is so what's up on the end, Rick has to agree with
So I
it.
think, so we're gonna check,
Over the
just
fence.
moving simply forward with support new and improved freight and passenger rail.
Thank you, I love it. Very good.
Are
With the
folks
note
okay with that?
saying non-hazardous.
The notes,
correct.
it can be more specific
Yeah.
with the
Electric
non-hazardous.
Thank you, thank you.
Electric power
Okay.
furniture.
All right, we're gonna move on.
Okay, next slide.
Next slide.
Okay, so keep us moving. Goal 7, policy 2. So, this one is around encouraging the use of Northwest native plants and landscaping, particularly adjacent to critical areas, and discouraging the use of invasive non-native, example English ivy. For example, work with partners to establish and sustain a native plant nursery and seed banks to support long-term restoration and carbon sequestration efforts. So, this was not previously recommended for cross-reference, but this is part of our solution. I went in looking for, is there duplication anywhere else on our list? Because I really don't want very similar words in two different places. And so this is one that we noticed, the first part of this policy, the non-bold text, already lives in our environmental chapter in our comprehensive plan, and we don't see any reason we couldn't bring that bold text over into the environmental chapter. So this is a new recommendation to cross-reference this policy with your all's additional bold text.
Where is the bold text from?
That came from, it's either TAG or EJC member suggestion. So it's a previous iteration of this, that text got added by advisory group members. So, it seemed like that was one possible, anyway, so that's the recommendation, is move that one over to cross-reference. I'm gonna go through the next two as well, just for speed. Goal 14 policy 1 is around ensuring no net loss of ecosystem composition, structure, and functions, assessing priority habitats in critical areas, and strive for net ecological gain to enhance climate resilience, restore habitat connectivity, and protect areas that provide for safe passage of migratory species. So, you all may remember we had a discussion at the last meeting where like people were saying, this sounds familiar, like this sounds like other things that might be in the comprehensive plan. So, staff were tasked to go double check, if this already is covered by existing policies. And so, based on our research, it's kind of messy. It's like pieces of it exist in the environmental chapter, but not all of it. So, for now, our recommendation, I have to shout over the. Our recommendation is just keep it on the study more, like keep it on the climate list, for further analysis, but logistically, we may recommend, we actually think this should live in the environmental chapter and cross-reference it later, but because it really is a mess, like some of the words are there, but not others, that's our recommendation for now. So just study for further analysis. Okay. And then the third one here, the enhance and improve the region's air quality, strive to monitor PM 2.5 throughout Clark County and partner with the Clark County Health Department to set specific targets related to air quality. This is another instance where it hadn't been on our cross-reference list, but we realized that this is basically reworded an existing policy in the environmental chapter, which was around maintaining and enhancing the region's air quality, and this group had suggested, to change that to enhance and improve. So, again, rather than having different policies with slightly different air quality goals, we should just revise the one that already exists in the environmental chapter. So this would be a new recommendation for cross-referencing.
What's PM?
Particulate matter. And so basically the first and the third one on this slide, by adding those as cross-references, that is how we are addressing the keeping some things on the list that we mentioned earlier. So that's how we are approaching staying at close to 35. So, okay, so that's those. Sylvia, do you want to?
Sure. Can I add something clarification on that? Sorry, Brent, you asked where the bolded text in Goal 7, Policy 2 came from. That's actually from the menu of measures.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
There it is.
On which the CAG said they were, an advisory group said that they.
Number
like to
508.
make. Okay, so I'm just gonna see if there's any concerns with any of those three recommendations. But first, Andrea was first, and then Nick and Monica. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Andrea.
thank you, Andrea again. So with goal 14, policy 1, I would just double check that there's not duplication on the state level with some stuff. I know that Fish and Wildlife in particular is working on some of this right now, in direct relation to recent legislation that was passed. So just a heads up on that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Nick?
I have never remembered this committee talking about bold text on anything.
I believe it was not in bold previously. It was maybe shown in.
Yeah, but I
underlined.
just don't care if it's in bold text or text as long as it's in there. So if it's just a bold text deal, it's like wordsmithing wordsmiths. I mean, to me, it's redundancy. So, if the words are in there, then it's good enough for me.
So what's, and I'm sorry.
Well, it says they can't include it for bold text. Well,
Yeah, I think-
remove the bold text and put it in there.
At the last meeting, there were several policies that you all wanted to cross-reference, but there was an additional text that you thought was important to include.
Okay.
And so that's what that text is here, kind of the additional caveats that this CAG thought was.
Yeah, I was confused about that.
No, that's
but-
okay, it's
Yeah,
very
if
confusing.
it's just a bold text issue, just.
Okay, okay. Okay. And Monica?
So for G7P2, it gives the example, like, for example, English ivy, but also I'm thinking about, grass and how we water grass in the lawns. I don't do mine because I don't eat grass. And so, there's a lot of water, I believe, that is being wasted on pristine lawns, and not food. And so, saying in there something like preserving water for food and not for, you know, things that we don't eat, really. So, I don't know.
But that's different. This is talking about Northwest native plants, not,
Okay.
not water use.
Yeah, you'll get a big argument from my wife on that one.
And there's also benefits to pollinator plants.
Well, that's part of it.
Yeah, I was
Well,
talking about like a
green
lot of
grass,
things.
I don't know how you
Yeah,
can get green
yeah.
grass on top of
All right,
You
I
know,
know
the flowers.
we're getting to the end of the meeting. Sharon?
So on number 6, so the county doesn't currently monitor PM?
I would need to double check,
I'd be
we do have air
surprised.
quality data, and there's a clean air agency for
Mhm.
Southwest Washington that monitors clean air.
Usually the health department does it?
Right, and our health department has access to health data as well, so,
This says strive to monitor as though it's not being done currently.
I think it's sporadic and periodic, not continuous.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to, on my crushers, I have to monitor that and send it in reports every year. Yeah. It's all with
So-
clean air too, but like roadways and things.
So Jenna will follow up.
yeah, so I think we
Okay.
will verify, and I think part of the matrix Tracy went over very quickly, one of the things there is like authority, like we'll double check with our partner departments, and they can say, oh, we already do that, or,
Right.
you know, so, anyway, so we'll double check that.
And Gabriella online?
Yes, thank you. I just want to make a comment. So we're not talking about water, but we are talking about reducing greenhouse green gases. And one of the things that probably we need to consider is education for the community about, yes, native plants for their households, their yards. And one of the things, and I say this by personal experience, there's a vast amount of moss in the land, in the yard. So actually I found out that moss creates more oxygen than even trees. So having that kind of information for homeowners and businesses when they do their landscaping designs and things like that, and encourage them to use native plants, that kind of information can be added in there. So for them to consider, instead of killing the moss, just let it grow and produce more clean air for our environment.
Okay, thanks, Gabriella. So it sounds like you're in support of the goal 7P2, like encouraging the use of Northwest native plants, which could
Yes.
include kind of education there too, okay?
Putting that in the side note.
So side note, education support for goal 7P2. I don't know why I keep pointing at you.
Yeah. Side note.
Okay, so I heard several comments on this set of 3 goals and policies, but maybe not any major changes. Are folks good with these moving forward with the recommended proposal?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm gonna do a check. I don't think we have any members of the public online, but is that right, Nicole? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're skipping over public comment. We have 2 minutes. And now we get to go to the
Climate change in 2 minutes.
2 more policies, if we can get through them.
Talk fast, like speed, Jeff.
These were policies that we did not reach consensus on at the last meeting.
Oh, we don't have, can we just table these and move them forward, or increase?
Well, sure, if that's what folks want to do, that sounds great.
No. Yeah, no. And we got 2 more.
Not
Yeah.
pick alone.
We worked so hard on this.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to
We have
check
a new
in,
proposal
with,
for wording.
yes, with Ann, Sunrise, and
Oh,
Noel.
that, I am so sorry, I will step back from it. You
Yeah,
worked very hard on that, I am so sorry.
Let's hear the update from these 3 who sounds like they had lunch together or otherwise met.
Came up with.
Sure.
Just see if
Yes.
that.
So this is goal 3, policy 1, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So we did meet, and then we had a lot of email back and forth. We did a lot of wordsmithing, a lot of brainstorming. And we came up with, we wanted to move away from necessarily increasing
facilitating increased land access and take it to a different level. And here is the wording that we came up with. Take steps to preserve existing ag and resource land by prioritizing infrastructures that keeps the existing ag economy viable, including education, research, and technology.
Wow.
Well done.
Well done.
Sounds good.
I like it.
Oh, you can, no. And no, I'm totally supportive. I just want to go on the record saying it's not because I disagree with the original facilitating increased land access. I just think that falls into either a separate goal or even into the hands of hopefully an ag commission to work with the county and the staff on what those programs might be. But I liked better the more global approach of let's preserve what we've got before we lose any more for climate change purposes. So that's what we ended up with.
Thank you, Anne, for kind of explaining a little bit more about the change. So does that sound okay? I saw some head nods as
Yes.
that was being written. Okay?
Monica.
Yes.
Monica?
I love the preserving the farmland that already exists. I also do want to maybe create like what Heritage Farm has, but like where people have stake in the land, so that it's not just the people that already own the land. It's being able to, like, I don't know who owns the land right now, but I'm not sure if it's a bunch of BIPOC people. Like, I want
What is
people,
BIPOC?
Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
Sorry?
No, you're good. You're so, I didn't know until like last night.
Get thrown around sometimes, like.
They need to go to lunch.
I want to make sure that everybody who wants to be a farmer learn how to be a farmer. There's education programs for that, and there's ways for that to also still happen, but like having spaces for it, not just say, oh yeah, go here, but like making it affordable, accessible for all. And so, but I very much agree with the preserving what we have right now and not letting that go away and then having to outsource our food from somewhere else. That's not what we're trying to do. But I want to create education for the people who do want to become farmers.
And does it sound like that works within the wording there about keeping the agricultural economy viable? I mean, does that sound like it, Monica,
And the word infrastructure was important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the specification of education, research, and technology, I think is important too.
Exactly. And also how China does it, where they give money.
Monica, we have to move on.
Sorry, go for it.
So does it sound okay?
Yes, it sounds okay,
Perfect,
yes.
okay. All right, it is 2 minutes over. I don't want to keep folks too long, but we do have one more policy. So if folks have just a couple of minutes, then we'll be done with resilience for some time.
When have we ever done anything in a couple of minutes?
No.
I can explain this one.
Okay.
Are we okay to
Yes.
do the last one? Okay.
Okay, thank you,
So,
everyone.
in our last meeting, we had this Goal 26 Policy 1 about affordable housing, and there was some question about whether or not it was really applicable to the resilience topic and wanting to get a little more clarity on that. So, this one has been dramatically reworded. The new wording is here: ensure that policies and codes protect access to safe, affordable housing, especially in overburdened communities. And then just for a bit of clarification on the connection, it says access to safe, stable housing provides protection during extreme weather events, while affordable housing leaves residents more resources to spend on resilience-building essentials such as air conditioning, air purification, food, and healthcare. So that's the new wording, and the old wording is on your printout in italics, if you'd like to reference what it was before.
I would like to add the word actual affordable housing. My housing is not actually affordable right now, and so I want to make sure that I'm not stressing out all the time about rent and then doing all of the meetings and then being a mom and then having a social life, which is non-existent. And so yeah, right, this is my social life. And so actual affordable housing, I really am advocating for.
Monica, I think affordable.
I don't, because that's what we have right now.
No, we don't have a whole lot.
No.
That's why we say actual affordable,
So
yeah.
just adding actual, are folks okay with that? Actual affordable? I don't know if that's.
I don't think it's necessary.
We do have actual.
Affordable is affordable.
But to whom? To me, it's not affordable right now.
Well,
And
it's
that's
not
It
affordable to
might never be
anybody.
affordable to you, Monica. I'm not teasing.
This is,
Well, I was like, let's.
this is one of those can of worms right now.
Well, and it is in the comment tracker I'm hearing,
Yeah,
is, you know,
it's in the-
affordable needs to mean actually affordable.
Yeah.
Would that be sufficient to have it in the comment tracker?
But you need the definition, what defines affordable based on the economy and standard of living, cost of living?
And like the, percentage of how you're getting paid and how much rent is and everything, like, we need to actually call it out if it's going to change.
But then you need to define actually affordable. So you're just going one step
So let's.
That's
further
fine.
into
And then, and
unnecessary
maybe
complexity.
I'll
Instead
call
of being
staff to see
depressed
if there
all the
is, like, if affordable housing in this context does have some kind of definition, and then.
Maybe
So
there's-
HB 1220 actually requires, to plan and accommodate housing for all of the different income levels. So, and it doesn't say actual affordability, it just says affordable. So I think it's sort of covered maybe under the definition that we're already working with on affordable housing. I'm just saying.
But
We
again,
might not have to add the word actual.
what happens in 50 years from now, in 2050? We
Have
don't
you,
know
have
that.
you seen 1220?
And I'll check,
I'd be glad to
Justin
go.
online has a comment? Justin?
Hi there, Justin Wood here. Wanted to provide a little context around affordable housing. So when we're talking about affordable housing, it generally means that folks aren't cost burdened, which means they're spending no more than 30% of their monthly income on housing. And to Noelle and Nick's point, based on how much you make, those are different housing types. So just from my comment, I would be supportive of just maintaining affordable housing. Because I think it really encompasses all different income brackets, rather than actual affordable. I think we could say what that is all day. So, just wanted to provide that, and, fine with the language as is now.
I do not agree. Because it keeps on going up and up and up, because people say, oh, things are getting more expensive and more expensive and more expensive, and then it just keeps on doing this.
But Monica, it's 30%.
It's not what I'm paying, right? I'm paying like.
I know, but is
like all of it.
30% acceptable? to you?
Yes,
Okay,
Yes.
that's what we're saying.
exactly, yes.
That's what we
Yeah.
define as affordable as.
Yeah, that's the definition.
So that means we do rent reduction then
Oh,
in the
that's
county,
definitely-
if that's actually how it's
So
gonna go.
maybe, Monica, if in the comments we put, like, when we, it sounds like the word affordable housing here means 30% of income, it's just that sometimes doesn't happen in practice.
Right, I mean, it doesn't feel equitable, it doesn't feel like it's actually happening, but that is the actual definition, just like Keystone CCs is something I wasn't familiar with. Affordable, it means 30% of your income, so I think we're kind of covering it, but
And she's a perfect example of this affordable housing. She lost her daughter who moved across the across the state, the country, to buy affordable housing.
Yep.
So it's a real problem in our neighborhood right here. I don't want my kids moving. I went to Castle Rock, got my own subdivision, so I could subsidize them to do it so they won't leave to South Carolina, right? I mean, so that's kind of what's happening.
I've almost been evicted about like 3 times in the past 3 years, so it really is a depressing state in my life, and I just wanna make it very aware that, like, if we're actually going to make the housing affordable, it needs to be actually affordable. Otherwise, it's just gonna be the same thing over
Yeah.
and over again.
Okay, and there's a couple of comments online too. I don't want to keep folks over much longer, but go ahead, and let me go to Andrea and Gabriella first.
Yeah, Andrea again. Would like to see codes changed to regulations to encompass all regulations across the county. I know there's been a number of legislative changes in recent years regarding zone and whatnot, but would like to see things to go above and beyond that, just because the cost of regulation right now is so catastrophic to home builders in this state. So if we want more affordable housing, we have to support the locally grown, native companies that were built here in this state and want to produce quality housing for their community. Thanks.
Policies, codes, and regulations. And Gabriella?
Yes, thank you. So about affordable housing, I think that we need to also look at the income level. So even if the minimum wage goes up, the medium income doesn't go up. So that's where things are not affordable, not only for low income, but for middle income families. So everything goes up, food, rent, and but the salaries don't go up. So we need to look at that.
Okay, thank you, Gabriella. Sunrise, did you have one more comment? Okay. So maybe I'll do a check now to see, knowing that in this goal, I'm sorry. Did you have something to- I thought that was from
didn't. I
before.
just forgot to put it down.
Okay. So I think we're checking to see if this sounds okay, knowing that affordable housing here means a third of income, and maybe adding to policies, codes, and regulations in the first few words there. Would folks be okay with this moving forward?
Maybe even adding a third of income and not with the affordable housing to make it even more specific than instead of the word actual. Like what we put into the thing, what we choose to put into the thing is what we see and what we become. And so I want to make sure that that's a standard for people. Otherwise, people are going to be moving away. And people that don't have people to buy them houses here aren't going to be able to live here.
So Monica, you're asking to have it state
30%.
30%?
Yeah, of income.
So I actually,
Go for it.
I would greatly disagree with you, but I think I would on this one maybe, just because I don't think that it is affordable the way it is now.
No,
And
it's
if we put 30%, we may regret
Right.
that later.
Yeah.
And that may, I think putting that criteria and number, by keeping it affordable, we can all work, and some of us can work on the side on another test to really work on making those changes. I'd hate to pigeon, whatever, I don't wanna put this in the box.
Everybody get union jobs.
So, I mean, just
Well, they
because
don't have
maybe,
enough work, though.
maybe it can be better, yeah. Because even 30%, I mean, there needs to be big changes on what that means. So
Yeah.
I'd hate to
Yeah.
put the numbers in there.
It's fine, because even relative to so many other things.
Yeah, because right now, it's like there's this survey or this thing that went out where it's, if you want to live in Washington State, you have to make at least $40 an hour. I'm not making $40 an hour. So it's a big problem.
Yeah, and I'm hearing from everyone that
Yeah.
affordable housing is a big
Not
problem,
affordable.
and folks
Yeah.
want to address it.
Yeah.
But for purposes here, can this move forward?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Monica. Okay, thank you everyone for your hard work and for staying a little bit over here.
We get overtime, right?
You get overtime, you get extra pizza.
Double pay.
Just next step, we're gonna do more work. Project team's gonna seek your feedback on some of that criteria that we talked about. And you have your next meeting on August 28th. I think I'm just gonna end it there. Okay, thank you everyone so much, really appreciate the exercise.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Have a good night.
And I think meeting adjourned, folks.
Have you traveled in Europe?